Chapter 211. After Bernal's wedding, the visiting noble families left one after another. The Fergus family gradually regained its former peace. The only difference was that the Fergus family had a new member. Gray continued to cultivate every day, grinding his bottleneck. Finally, one day, whoosh, around Gray, who was cultivating, a sudden gust of wind whistled. The gust of wind formed a green tornado, enveloping Gray's surroundings. There were also bits of sparkling white, which were formed by bits of cold air. The green gale wolf moved on its own, stretching its body as if it was no different from a real gale wolf. Howl! Then, the wolf opened its mouth and let out a sharp howl. The gust of wind surrounding Gray suddenly shattered, turning into wind blades that sputtered in all directions. Pu-pu-pu. The walls, the floor, the roof. Wherever the wind blades touched, they were all pierced, and bits of ice appeared. In an instant, the entire cultivation room became full of holes. It was as if it had been attacked by a hail of bullets. Above his head, large pieces of debris fell. Around him, stones fell one after another. It looked as if the entire cultivation room was about to collapse. Bang! Gray did not care about where the door was and crashed into the nearest wall. Relying on his strong physique, he broke through the wall and rushed out. Rumble! The moment he rushed out, the entire cultivation room collapsed and turned into ruins. Dust flew all over the ground, forcing Gray to retreat again and again to avoid the dust that had been kicked up. Not only the cultivation room, but even the nearby buildings were damaged in many places. Clear holes could be seen. Fortunately, this place was at the back of the Fergus family's castle. Few servants came here. Otherwise, there would be injuries and even deaths. Gray, what's going on? The first to arrive was Viscount Fergus. He looked in shock at Gray's cultivation room, which had turned into ruins, and the surrounding buildings that were full of holes. I might have broken through. Even Gray himself was a little confused. While he was cultivating, he suddenly felt a gust of wind howling around him, followed by a sharp howl of a wolf. Next, in the blink of an eye, the surrounding area was riddled with holes, and the houses collapsed. If he hadn't run fast enough, he would have been buried alive. Breakthrough? What did you break through? Viscount Fergus was puzzled by Gray's ambiguous words. I broke through to become a berserker. Gray could only add, I broke through to become a berserker. Viscount Fergus subconsciously muttered these words. Then his eyes suddenly widened, revealing disbelief in his eyes. What? You broke through to berserker? I think so, Gray said uncertainly. Before this, he had already reached the bottleneck between vicious warrior and berserker. Now, the blood arts he cultivated had suddenly gone berserk, causing such a huge commotion. According to his estimation, it was very likely that he had broken through the bottleneck, and his strength had reached the level of a berserker. Come, follow me to the cultivation room. No, go outside the castle. Originally, Viscount Fergus wanted to ask Gray to go to the cultivation room for a test, but when he thought of the destructive power of a berserker, he immediately denied it. Although his cultivation room had been specially reinforced, it would definitely not be able to withstand the destruction of a berserker. When the test was over, his cultivation room would probably be ruined. So, when Bernal and the others arrived, they just happened to see Gray and Viscount Fergus rushing out of the castle. Although they wanted to chase after them, they found that the speed of the two was too fast to catch up. Gray and Viscount Fergus left the castle and soon came to a forest near the castle. The best way to test the power was to find a forest and then bombard the forest, because this method had a reference and was the most intuitive. Fortunately, there were no environmentalists in this world. Otherwise, people like Gray and Viscount Fergus, who had such dangerous ideas, would probably be punished to bankruptcy. Try to use your strongest blood beast ability. Viscount Fergus's eyes were filled with anticipation and apprehension. Cultivating a berserker was the pursuit of several generations of the Fergus family. At this moment, he was looking forward to Gray displaying the strength of a berserker, but he was also apprehensive about whether Gray had made a mistake. For a moment, who was usually calm, was actually worried about personal gains and losses. Okay. Gray nodded and tried to mobilize his blood beast ability, releasing it to the strongest extent. Whoosh! A fierce green gale suddenly appeared and spiraled around Gray, forming a terrifying green tornado. Viscount Fergus, who was closer to Gray, was affected by the green tornado. It was as if he had been scraped by a blade. He hurriedly retreated more than 10 meters before he felt the pain. Crack! Suddenly, the green tornado surrounding Gray suddenly shattered and turned into wind blades, sweeping toward the forest in front. Puff, 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 puff. Continuous cutting sounds suddenly rang out, and the forest in front of Gray and Viscount Fergus suffered a calamity. Wind blades swept across in an unstoppable manner. The trees in front of them, regardless of whether they were large enough for one person to hug or several people to hug, collapsed one after another. The cut was as smooth as a mirror. In the end, it actually formed an arc with a radius of tens of meters. Within the arc, not a single tree could stand upright. All of them were cut off and collapsed. At the same time, there were bits of ice crystals attached to the cut. Good. Viscount Fergus's face was full of unconcealable smiles when he saw this devastating scene. He laughed heartily. Berserker, Gray had definitely reached the level of a berserker. It was absolutely impossible for a berserker to achieve this kind of power. Gray was undoubtedly a berserker. The hope of several generations had finally been realized. The Fergus family had finally cultivated a berserker. There was no doubt that the Fergus family was one step closer to the position of Count. There were two hard conditions for the position of Count. One was to have a berserker in the family to oversee it. The other was to obtain enough military merits. Now, the first hard condition had been met. As for the second condition, the Fergus family had accumulated a lot of military merits through the efforts of several generations. Moreover, with a berserker and 4 berserker blood fiends, there was no need to worry about not being able to obtain military merits. Military merits, military merits. Viscount Fergus clenched his fists tightly. His expression was excited, as if he had fallen into a trance. As long as they obtained enough military merits, the Fergus family should be able to become a Count family. The Fergus family was only one step away from the position of Count. Whoosh, whoosh. After testing the abilities of the strongest blood fiends, Gray tested the changes in his body. It wasn't easy to test his strength and defense, but he could definitely feel the increase in his speed. Being as swift as the wind was the most realistic portrayal of him at this moment. Viscount Fergus couldn't help but say good several times. With such speed, what else could he be if not a berserker? After staying in the forest for half an hour, Gray and Viscount Fergus returned to the castle the way they came. Bernal walked over with an anxious expression. Gray, why did the training room collapse? Let's talk in the study room. The smile on Viscount Fergus's face had already disappeared, but one could still see that he was in an extremely good mood. He waved at Bernal and led Gray and Bernal to the study room. What? Gray is already a berserker. The expression that was similar to Viscount Fergus's at the beginning appeared on Bernal's face. Agitation, excitement, ecstasy. Although the current him had no fate with the title of Viscount, he still sincerely hoped that the Fergus family would become stronger, because this would also be beneficial to him. Not to mention other things, when attending a banquet and introducing oneself as someone from a certain Count's family, one would definitely be more sought after and receive more attention than someone from a certain Viscount's family. After accompanying the excited Viscount Fergus and Bernal for a while, Gray was finally able to leave the study room. He had just finished training and was covered in sweat. He was first pulled away by Viscount Fergus to test the abilities of his blood fiends. Then he was pulled into the study room for more than half an hour, which made him feel uncomfortable all over. Soaking in the bathtub, he couldn't help but recall the scene when he tested the abilities of his blood fiends. After all, the Gale Wolf is an ordinary blood fiend. In terms of power, it is still much weaker than the Jade Lizard, which is a special blood fiend. In Viscount Fergus's opinion, it was already extremely powerful, but in his opinion, it was just SOSO. The last time he saw the Jade Lizard using its blood fiend abilities, it was still an unforgettable scene even now. In an instant, With the Jade Lizard as the center, all the plants within a 100-meter radius were controlled by the Jade Lizard and turned into its weapons. That scene was simply too shocking. In comparison, the Gale Wolf's Gale Blade Blood Fiend ability was much weaker. Among the Blood Fiend's abilities, it should only be of an ordinary standard. However, the Gale Blade has its own advantages. At least it doesn't have any geographical restrictions. Although the Jade Lizard's ability to control plants was extremely powerful, it could only be used in places with plants. Although plant seeds could be used to make up for this flaw, its power would be greatly reduced. Moreover, as someone who cultivates the Gale Wolf sequence, when fighting in the Sydney territory, there are many times when I can only use the Gale Blade to deal with my enemies. Looks like I have to think of a way to increase the power of the Gale Blade. Gray decided in his heart. After all, he cultivated the Gale Wolf sequence blood technique. The increase in the power of the Gale Blade could be explained as a mutation. However, if he suddenly used the ability of plants, it would be difficult to explain it as a mutation. Although there were such huge mutations, they were very rare. This kind of mutation on the original foundation was more common. With the idea of increasing the power of the Gale Blade, he couldn't help but think of another related matter and couldn't help but frown. Chapter 2:12. Why did it become weaker? Since it did not consume the blood of a berserk ice attribute blood fiend, the ice ability in the wind blades did not become stronger. He could guess why. However, the fact that it had weakened was far beyond his expectations. Could it be because the power was dispersed? He frowned and pondered for a moment before coming to this conclusion. The blood fiend ability he had used earlier was the Gale Blade, ability of the Gale Wolf. It could release dozens of wind blades to attack the target in an instant. These dozens of wind blades were all imbued with the ice ability. In other words, the ice ability was dispersed. The ice ability did not become stronger to begin with. In addition, it was dispersed, causing the ice ability on each wind blade to become weaker. After bathing, Gray went directly to the forest connected to the basement. The test was far from over. However, he could not go all out because of Viscount Fergus's presence. A moment later, boom, boom, boom. In the forest, the 5-meter-long Jade Lizard and Gray were engaged in a fierce battle. The Jade Lizard attacked Gray with its tail, claws, and every other part of its body that could be used as a weapon. Gray's fists and feet were also wildly smashing the Jade Lizard's body. Rocks and soil flew everywhere as large trees collapsed. Beasts and birds fled in all directions. It was as if the end of the world had arrived. Gray and the Jade Lizard were covered in bruises. The more serious areas were even badly mutilated. The scales of the Jade Lizard had fallen off, revealing the white flesh underneath. Whether it was Gray or the Jade Lizard, neither of them suppressed their strength and attacked with all their might. After all, this was a test of their true combat strength. Naturally, they had to go all out. Of course, the main reason why they were so crazy was that they had the ability to reverse nurture. The injuries on their bodies would heal very quickly. That was why they were so fearless. Of course, the pain during the process could not be erased. However, the pain now was better than losing his life when he encountered a strong enemy, because he did not know his own strength. Fortunately, this forest was far away from Fergus Castle. Moreover, very few people came here. Therefore, no one would discover the commotion here. In the middle of the battle, Gray let out a low roar. Then, the plants within 100 meters of him started twisting crazily. They were like giant pythons that had come to life, attacking the Jade Lizard one after another. Under the attacks of these giant pythons that had come alive, the Jade Lizard, which had been evenly matched with Gray earlier, was finally forced to retreat. The scales on his body fell off in large chunks, and there were many places where his flesh was badly damaged. In the end, he was directly tied up, unable to struggle free. Gray exhaled softly and controlled the plant to let go of the Jade Lizard. At the end of the test, he had a rough understanding of his full strength. In terms of strength, speed, and defense, he was almost identical to the Jade Lizard. It was obvious that after consuming the Jade Lizard's blood, he had completely inherited the Jade Lizard's speed, strength, and defense characteristics. As for the ability of the Blood Fiend, it was exactly the same as the Jade Lizard. With him as the center, all the plants within a 100-meter radius were under his control, and every one of them was as hard as steel. Right now, his battle prowess was no different from the Jade Lizard back then. Whoosh! Using the reverse nurturing ability, green light surrounded him and the Jade Lizard, healing their injuries. Then, he found a wolf that was too unlucky and had been crushed to death by a collapsed tree. Now that my strength has reached the level of a berserker, I wonder if the upper limit of my ability to control corpses will increase. The moment the wolf stood up, the Jade Lizard beside Gray suddenly went limp like a robot without electricity and fell to the ground with a plop. As expected, it won't increase anymore. Seeing this scene, Gray shook his head helplessly. He released the control of the wolf and regained control of the Jade Lizard. He had already expected such an outcome, but he still couldn't help but want to try it. The result was as expected. After all, the zombie ape was only a murderous level blood fiend. Its ability to control corpses had already been developed to the limit. Even if his strength had reached the level of a berserker, his ability to control corpses would not increase. It seems that if I want to increase my ability to control corpses, I can only see if I can find a blood fiend with a zombie ape in the future. The zombie ape's ability to control corpses was definitely powerful. Relying on it, Gray could even kill a berserker blood fiend above his level. He had even killed a berserker from a shadow serpent. If there was a chance to obtain a stronger ability to control corpses, he naturally wanted to do so. However, this would depend on whether he had the chance in the future. The next day, Viscount Fergus sent over the essence of the Gale Wolf's blood, which had been mixed with medicine. Gray consumed it. After a period of soreness, he felt weak for an entire day. After recovering, he began to cultivate the Gale Wolf blood technique. The Gale Wolf blood technique was somewhat similar to the Wind Wolf and Gale Wolf blood technique. It was also divided into 4 cultivation postures. Similarly, one had to maintain the cultivation postures on the outside and construct a totem with the power of blood on the inside. However, there were also differences. The cultivation postures were very different from the Wind Wolf and Gale Wolf. The postures were awkward and extremely difficult. The internal totem construction was also more complicated. There were hundreds of nodes. The position of each node in the body could not be the slightest bit wrong. Otherwise, even if the totem was constructed, it would be difficult to temper the body. Gray spent a few days to successfully construct the first cultivation posture's totem. The moment the totem was completed, a 5-meter-long, slender, and well-proportioned wolf-shaped blood beast phantom appeared. Similar to the Wind Wolf and Gale Wolf, this wolf-shaped blood beast phantom was also covered in green. It was like an enlarged version of the Wind Wolf and Gale Wolf. However, in addition to its green fur, there were some mysterious black veins on its abdomen. This caused the entire wolf to be enveloped in a layer of mysterious aura. Majestic and mysterious. Because the cultivation room was broken, Gray could only cultivate in Viscount Fergus's cultivation room for the time being. This was how Viscount Fergus felt after seeing Gray successfully cultivate the first cultivation posture and draw out the Gale Wolf phantom. Subsequently, Gray began to cultivate the second, third, and fourth cultivation postures. After half a month, Gray was finally able to master all 4 cultivation postures. Finally, he could cultivate normally. At this time, the cultivation room that had been rebuilt for Gray was finally completed. Gray was able to return to his own cultivation room to cultivate. Similar to the time when he had consumed the blood essence of the Gale Wolf, Gray's cultivation progress for the second cultivation posture was already halfway through. Obviously, due to the transformation ability, not only did he successfully implant the blood essence of the Gale Wolf, but he also obtained a certain degree of improvement. 1 month later. Will it take at least 2 years? After 1 month of cultivation and improvement, Gray had a rough estimate of how long it would take for him to become a barbaric blood warrior. 2 years. It would take him 2 years. And this was only the minimum time. The time spent on bottlenecks was not included. In fact, when it came to the cultivation of blood arts, other than when an ordinary person was advancing by a large realm, there would also be bottlenecks in between. It was just that Gray had never encountered such a bottleneck. Not having encountered it did not mean that it did not exist. Gray also did not know whether he would encounter it or not. Therefore, 2 years was already the minimum. 2 years is already not bad. Although it would take twice the time to advance from a vicious blood warrior to a berserker, Gray did not feel that it was slow at all. Even if it took at least 2 years, it was still an extremely terrifying cultivation speed. For example, Viscount Fergus was stuck at the vicious blood warrior realm. It would be extremely difficult for him to advance to the berserker realm. As for Gray, he could advance from a berserker to a barbaric blood warrior in 2 years. If Viscount Fergus knew about this, he would probably be so ashamed that he would bang his head against the wall. Moreover, in these 2 years, my strength will definitely not remain the same. In terms of realm, Gray was already unable to advance from the savage level to the barbaric level in a short period of time. However, this did not mean that Gray's strength would stagnate in these 2 years. 2 years is enough for me to consume the blood of blood beasts 4 times. In 2 years, even if he consumed the blood of blood beasts every 5 months, it would be enough for him to consume the blood of blood beasts 4 times in this period of time. As long as he could choose the blood of blood beasts well and use it to strengthen Gray's strength would definitely increase again. For example, he had previously thought of finding a wind-type blood beast that was famous for its strength among those of the same realm to increase the power of Gray's wind blades. This would allow Gray's strength to increase again. In addition, he could also find the blood of a blood beast with powerful ice abilities to increase the ice ability of the wild wind blade. He believed that after the wind and ice abilities of the wild wind blade were greatly improved, the power of the wild wind blade would definitely increase exponentially. Its final power might even surpass Gray's plant control ability from the Jade Lizard. At that time, when he fought with all his strength, he could use the plant ability to restrain his opponent and the strengthened wild wind blade as a means of attack. Gray might even be able to challenge someone of a higher realm. In a purple bedroom, a purple-haired young lady slowly opened her eyes. Her clear black and white eyes were clear and bright. She sat up and couldn't help but recall the scene she saw in her dream. In the depths of the dense forest, there were ruins of buildings covered in moss. Although they had long been destroyed, one could still vaguely see their original majesty. The stone pillars were so thick that it would take several people to wrap their arms around them. The stone used for the walls was as hard as steel. Although it had been thousands of years, it had not been weathered. She took out a folded piece of leather paper from the drawer of the small wooden table beside her. This was a map of the entire Purple Moon Kingdom. She searched carefully and finally marked an X in a forest on the map. Chapter 213. After finishing his training, Gray walked out of the training room and was greeted by a young girl who hugged his arm excitedly. "Brother, I've become a low-level blood warrior." "Amazing." A smile appeared on Gray's face as he patted the young man's head and praised him. Sarah had only started her training for a little over a year, but she had already become a low-level blood warrior. Her training speed was almost the same as the original owner of this body. Of course, Gray had a lot to do with this. After entering the Red Leaf Forest, Gray brought back a lot of blood from the Blood Fiends. As a result, everyone, including Sarah, had blood from the Blood Fiends to aid their training every day. With such a rich supply of resources, it was certain that their strength would increase quickly. Not only her, but Bernal and the rest had also increased their strength. "Brother." Gray was smiling when a hand suddenly reached out and spread in front of him. Gray looked sideways at Sarah and saw her looking at him expectantly. It was obvious that she was asking for a gift. "Didn't I just give you the Crimson Blood Horse a while ago?" Gray did not know whether to laugh or cry. In order to prevent Sarah from riding Hanhu, and since Gray's strength had reached the Berserk level, he did not need the Crimson Blood Horse anymore. Gray had given her the Crimson Blood Horse that Viscount Fergus had given him. How long had it been, and she was asking for a gift again? "No, it doesn't count." Sarah shook her head like waves. Gray scratched her nose helplessly and said, "Come with me." Gray brought her to his bedroom. He took out a vest of leather armor from the closet and handed it to her. This leather armor was the iron rhino inner armor that Viscount Fergus had given him. Its defense was extremely strong, and even the blood fiends of the ferocious blood warriors could not damage it. However, it was useless to him now. With the defense that he had inherited from the Jade Lizard, his defense was not inferior to this leather armor. Naturally, it was useless. Isn't this the iron rhino inner armor that Father gave you to protect yourself? It was a good thing, but the little girl was a little embarrassed to accept it. It was not because Gray had worn this inner armor before. Protective equipment, like the iron rhino inner armor, almost never wore out. It was common for people to use it for several generations. The reason why she didn't want to take it was because she knew that this thing was given to Gray by Viscount Fergus for self-defense. Although the little girl was greedy for money, she still thought about Gray's safety. Take it. I don't need it anymore. Amused, Gray looked at the man who wanted but didn't dare to take it. He stuffed the iron rhino inner armor into the man's hands. In the afternoon, when Gray was preparing to head to the training room, a servant of the castle walked over to him and spoke respectfully. "Young Master Gray, someone is here to visit you." "Got it." Gray responded and walked toward the reception hall. Because of his strength, Gray also had some connections in the aristocratic circle. Occasionally, some aristocratic children would come to visit him. Walking to the reception hall, Gray pushed the door open and saw the visitors. There were two people. One of them was a young woman in a purple dress, and the other was a man with brown sideburns. "It's you." Seeing the two people, Gray was surprised. The young woman in the purple dress was called Sophia Pendra, and the man with brown sideburns was called Teresa. As for their surnames, it was unknown. Yes, these two people were two of the 4 people who had gone with Gray to the Oka territory in the caravan and then met by chance in the ruins. "Hello." Facing Gray's surprised gaze, Sophia smiled elegantly, and the man with brown sideburns said cheerfully and enthusiastically, "Young master, we meet again. How did you know that I live here?" Facing the two people's friendly and enthusiastic greetings, Grimm's gaze was not very friendly. He did not forget that outside the Azure Forest, he had been tricked by these 4 people. Although what he said was the truth, the effect of this truth caused him to have a conflict with a mercenary group, which eventually led to a series of chain reactions. Of course, if he really wanted to take it seriously, he could not blame them. They were indeed not familiar with him, but they made him extremely unhappy. "I just asked around and found out," Sophia explained with a smile. Gray raised his eyebrows helplessly. Because of the Smalley family deliberately spreading the news, now he was indeed a little famous in the Sydney territory. If they really wanted to ask around, it would be easy to find out where he lived. However, he still said with a cold face, "Why are you looking for me? We should not be familiar with each other. We found a ruin." Sophia put away the smile on her face and said seriously, "Ruin?" Gray was surprised and looked at the two in surprise. The value of a ruin was enormous. The 2 ruins he had explored, whether it was the one in the Red Leaf Forest or the one in the Azure Forest, had brought him or the Fergus family at least 1,000,000 gold coins in profit. He did not expect that Sophia and Selena would find another ruin after the last one. Their luck was really too good. Yes, it should be a ruin from the Empire, but Julie and Irene have something to do and can't go together. The 2 of us are a little small, so we want to invite you to explore together," Sophia said. "Invite me to explore together?" Gray raised his eyebrows slightly. Every Empire ruin was a sleeping treasure with a huge amount of unowned wealth. An invitation to explore a ruin could be said to be a very tempting invitation. However, after a moment of serious consideration, he refused. "Sorry, you should find someone else. Last time, the other party clearly had 4 ferocious blood warriors, but they did not kill him, who only showed the strength of a ferocious blood warrior and monopolized the wealth in the ruin. From this point, there should be no problem with the two's character. However, he was not familiar with the 2 after all, and did not know them very well. It was very dangerous to rashly participate in such a dangerous ruin exploration with someone he was not familiar with, so he chose to refuse in the end. Faced with Gray's refusal, Sophia did not seem to be surprised. Instead, she smiled and said confidently, "Don't you want to hear the reward for inviting you?" "What reward?" Feeling that the other party was very confident that he would accept the invitation after hearing the reward, Gray could not help but ask curiously. "The Wind Wolf Echelon's Desolate Blood Technique." Sophia's red lips parted as she spoke. "What? You have the Wind Wolf Echelon's Desolate Blood Technique?" Gray was really shocked, and his breathing became heavy. He really felt that he could not refuse. His strength was now that of a ferocious blood warrior, and he was already cultivating the Wind Wolf Echelon's Barbarian Blood Technique. With his frightening cultivation speed, it was time for him to prepare a Desolate-level blood technique. However, a Desolate blood technique was not so easy to obtain. A Desolate blood technique that could be cultivated to the Desolate blood technique was definitely very valuable. It had appeared in some high-class auctions before, and the final price of each Desolate blood technique had reached millions of gold coins. With the wealth of the Fergus family and his own, it was not even enough to buy the cheapest Desolate blood technique. Now that the other party had actually proposed a Desolate blood technique, and one of the Wind Wolf Echelon's Desolate blood technique, as the reward for exploring the ruin, he really felt that he could not refuse. Although Gray tried his best to keep himself calm so that he would not be at a disadvantage in the following negotiations, Sophia could clearly see his desire for the Wind Wolf Echelon's Desolate blood technique. The other party smiled, revealing a demonic smile in Gray's eyes, and said, "Of course, this is not given to you unconditionally. This Wind Wolf Echelon's Berserk blood technique, I will sell it to you for 3 million gold coins. The loot from the ruin exploration will be divided equally between the three of us. Your share will be converted into gold coins and used to repay this 3 million until it is fully paid." What if the value is not enough? Gray raised his eyebrows slightly. The other party had provided the location of the ruin, and the three of them would split it equally. In a way, Gray had gained an advantage, and the Wind Wolf Echelon's Desolate blood technique for 3 million gold coins was a very reasonable price. However, 3 million gold coins was already a very large sum. The loot from the ruin exploration might not be enough to repay this 3 million gold coins. You can repay it slowly in the future. Don't worry, I won't rush you. Sophia smiled, and then directly handed a book with leather pages to Gray. "This is the Wind Wolf Echelon's Desolate blood technique. You don't have to return it to me. I've already had someone make a copy for you." Evidently, the other party was certain that Gray would agree, and had even made a copy. Reaching out to take it, Gray flipped it open and checked it. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he put it away and looked at the other party. "Aren't you afraid that I won't pay up? You could try." Sophia's eyes narrowed as she smiled, but it made Gray shiver all over. Someone who could casually take out a Desolate blood technique would not be simple. If he dared to go back on his word after making a deal with the other party, it would be no different from courting death. "Happy working with you." Sophia stood up and took the initiative to extend her hand to Gray. "Happy working with you." Gray reached out and shook the other party's hand. It was smooth and tender, but Gray did not have any other thoughts. All he had was a bitter smile. Chapter 214. "Brother, is this sister-in-law?" PFFF. Gray spat out a mouthful of tea. Because Gray needed to make some preparations, and also needed to explain things to Viscount Fergus, he didn't set off on the same day. Sophia and her servant naturally stayed behind at Fergus Castle. Sarah immediately said this when she saw Sophia, causing Gray to spit out the tea in his mouth. "What kind of eyesight is this? Does she look like your sister-in-law? If she really is your sister-in-law, then your brother's happiness for the rest of his life will be worrying." It wasn't because she wasn't beautiful. In terms of beauty, there was nothing to say. Sophia was definitely the most beautiful person Gray had ever seen, but she really wasn't someone easy to make a wife. To be able to afford a runic space pouch, and to be able to trade a Desolate-level blood technique, her identity was definitely not simple. Other things aside, the great disparity in status between the two families was enough to cause Gray to encounter many obstacles. Although Gray was confident that his future potential was definitely worthy of her, That would really be too tiring. He didn't want to be in a relationship that could be written into a classic love story. Moreover, although they hadn't interacted much, Gray could clearly feel that she had a tendency to be two-faced. If he really did marry her, he would probably be completely taken advantage of in the future. Just like now, he had already been tricked into becoming a debt slave. If she really did become his wife, who knew how miserable it would be? Yes. No. Two voices sounded at the same time. The former was Sophia's with an obvious joking tone, while the latter was Gray's serious voice. Hearing two completely different answers at the same time, Sarah didn't know who she should believe and asked suspiciously, "Brother, is it true or not?" Gray glared fiercely at Sophia, who was obviously teasing Sarah, and asked with a serious expression, "Of course not. I'm not familiar with her." After spending a full 10 minutes, he finally convinced Sarah that the other party was indeed not his future sister-in-law. Gray felt unusually tired, and was even more convinced that this kind of woman wasn't suitable to be his wife. The next morning, the carriage set out from Fergus Castle. The brown-bearded man, Teresa, drove the carriage as usual. Gray and Sophia sat in the carriage. Gray did not bring the berserk blood fiends with him. They were too big a target, and it was not convenient to carry them around. Moreover, he was already a berserk warrior, and his combat strength and self-defense ability were extremely strong. Besides, the castle also needed to be protected. Because of Gray's absence, Viscount Fergus and the others could not command the blood beasts. But before Gray left, he gave them some simple orders. Once they encountered danger, Viscount Fergus and the others only needed to retreat to the basement. The mad-class blood fiends would automatically attack the pursuing enemies and protect them. "Isn't it time to explain the general situation of the ruins to me?" Gray looked at Sophia. He didn't want to follow Sophia and Selena in their exploration without knowing anything. Although it was impossible for the other party to tell him the specific location of the ruins, he still needed to know the general situation, such as the approximate location of the ruins. "The ruins are located in the Night Forest." Sophia nodded and said, "Night Forest." Gray was no stranger to this name. Like the Red Leaves Forest, the Night Forest was also a huge forest that traversed the Sydney territory. The reason why this forest was called the Night Forest was because the vegetation in this forest was extremely lush, and there were many tall trees. Walking in the forest during the day also gave off a gloomy feeling, as if walking in the night. "How deep will it go?" Gray thought for a while and asked. "About 200 months deep," Sophia said with a serious expression. 200 months? Gray frowned and tapped his forehead. A month was a unit of length in this world. A month was equivalent to 1 kilometer in Gray's previous world. In other words, they had to go more than 200 kilometers deep into the forest. This depth was already extremely deep into the forest. Although Gray walked in the Red Leaves Forest for more than 10 days last time, it was more of an arc around the Red Leaves Forest instead of going deep into the forest. The deepest they went should be about 200 kilometers deep, and at that time, they could already encounter a mad-level blood fiend. Although the distribution of blood fiends varied from forest to forest, it was likely that the danger would not be low at this depth. Let me make it clear in advance. If the exploration process is too dangerous, I will immediately give up this exploration. Gray said with a serious expression, "No problem. We will judge when the time comes. Besides, we will not risk our lives." Sophia said with a smile. The carriage traveled for a whole day and had some dry food for lunch. In the evening, the carriage drove into a city. The city had been there for some years, and there were strong traces of weathering on the city walls. Judging from the traces, it was at least hundreds of years old. This was not a city of a noble, but a city that directly belonged to the Sydney family. The carriage traveled along the streets, looking for a better tavern. Regardless of whether it was Gray or Sophia and her servant, they did not lack money and did not need to be thrifty. The sun was about to set, but there were many people walking on the streets of the city. Some of them were like Gray and the rest, looking for a place to stay, and so were the residents of the city. They were looking at the stalls on both sides of the street, buying ingredients for dinner. The sound of chatting, bargaining, and the sound of carriages mixed together. It was a lively and harmonious scene. Oh, the carriage moved forward. Suddenly, the originally noisy noise abruptly disappeared like smoke in thin air. It was as if everyone had quieted down in an instant. What's going on? Such a strange situation naturally attracted Gray's attention. Just now, it was still extremely noisy on the street. Why did it suddenly become so quiet? He opened the curtain of the carriage and looked outside. On the street, the carriage was still shuttling back and forth, and the pedestrians were still talking. However, he could not hear a single sound. Is there something wrong with my ears? Gray was shocked. He felt as if he was squeezed out of a noisy world. But he was not injured, and there were no signs before this. How could there be something wrong with his ears? In the midst of his panic, he looked towards Sophia, who was sitting in the same carriage as him. But he saw that the expression on her face was similar to his, with the same look of astonishment hanging on her face. Can you hear what's going on outside? He hurriedly asked. I can't hear anything. Sophia shook her head with a strange expression. Outside, Teresa, who also felt that something was wrong, stopped the carriage and said, It's strange outside. You better come out and take a look. Gray and Sophia looked at each other and quickly opened the curtain and walked out of the carriage. Outside, the carriages and pedestrians shuttled back and forth, but there was no sound at all. In front of them, a carriage was speeding towards them. It was going to collide. Dodge! Gray and Sophia jumped out of the carriage without hesitation and dodged. With their current physical fitness, they would be fine even if they were hit by a carriage. But being fine was one thing, and being willing to be hit by a carriage was another. Crash! Then, a strange scene appeared in front of them. The two carriages collided, and then, as if one of them was an illusion, the two carriages overlapped and then quickly moved away from each other. From start to finish, there was no sound of collision. An illusion? Gray was shocked. Could it be that the carriage that rushed over just now was just an illusion? But how could there be an illusion that was so real? Sophia's expression was similar to his. She was also shocked. How could this be? Did you see? These guys have all turned into illusions. Teresa, who did not jump out of the carriage, said with a serious expression, What did we encounter? Gray's expression was serious. He stretched out his hand to touch a passerby, but his hand passed through the person's body without any obstruction, and the person did not react at all. This strange scene was truly a little horrifying. Could it be that we encountered that? Sophia frowned, as if she thought of something, but was not sure. What is it? Gray and Teresa could not help but look at Sophia, urgently seeking an answer. Even if the answer was not correct, they still wanted to hear it. I'm still not sure if you have that unknown material or use on you. Chapter 2:15. Something that we don't know what it is made of or what it's used for. Gray and Teresa had strange expressions on their faces. They did not know what this had to do with their current situation. However, the two of them hurriedly searched through their bodies. Not only the two of them, but Sophia also took out her own rune portal bag and began to search through it. Gray first rummaged through his own pockets. After confirming that there was nothing he couldn't recognize, he untied the leather pouch hanging on his waist and started rummaging through it. There were coins in the leather bag. There were silver coins, gold coins, and magic coins. After thinking for a while, he put his hand in and felt around. Then he touched a round object. Gray took out the round object and placed it on his palm. He looked at it carefully. It was a silver metal ball. It was about the size of an adult's thumb and was extremely light. It was almost weightless in the palm of his hand. Seeing this object, Gray could not help but recall the origin of this object. This was something that he had inadvertently obtained in the Oliver family's secret room when he was exterminating them. At that time, neither he nor Viscount Fergus could tell the origin of this object. They felt that this object was not ordinary, so Gray put it in the leather bag. Because it did not take up much space and did not feel heavy, Gray left it in the leather bag and did not take it out until now. Do you know what this is? After thinking for a while, Gray looked at Sophia and Teresa and asked. Hearing Gray's question, the two of them quickly looked over. I can't tell what it is made of. After looking at it, they realized that the two of them also did not know what it was. Even Sophia, who was obviously knowledgeable, did not know what the metal ball was. "So, what is?" Staring at the metal ball in Gray's hand, Sophia muttered. She was even more certain of her previous guess. "What did you encounter?" Gray and Teresa asked urgently. Sophia replied with a strange expression when faced with their questions. "We might have run into a ghost merchant." "Ghost merchant?" Gray and Teresa looked at each other and savored the word carefully. When they thought about the strange environment around them, they felt a chill run down their spine. According to an elder of the family, the ghost merchant should be an extremely powerful existence. When someone has something special, he will drag that person into a similar illusion and do business with that person. At this point, Sophia looked at Gray. "This phenomenon is very likely caused by the metal ball in your hand." "Business?" Gray's back was covered in cold sweat. Of course, there was nothing to be afraid of when doing business, but deliberately dragging someone into such an illusion to do business was a little creepy. "Since he wants to do business with you, he definitely won't hide. Let's look for him. Otherwise, we might be trapped here forever." The three of them walked along the street and looked at the stalls on both sides of the street. They did not want to miss any strange places. Suddenly, whoosh! Gray instinctively took a few steps back, as if he was avoiding snakes and scorpions. There was a wooden stall in front of them on the left. An old man stood in front of the stall. To his horror, the old man did not have any eyeballs. It was pitch black like an endless abyss. What made him even more terrified was that although the old man had no eyes, he seemed to be able to see things. Seeing the three of them approaching, the old man looked over, and his empty eyes happened to be fixed on them. It was not like he could determine their location by sound, but as if he could see them. Almost at the same time that Gray noticed this strange stall, Sophia and Teresa also noticed this stall. Their reactions were similar to Gray's, and they almost reflexively distanced themselves. In the face of the unknown, the first thing one would think of was to avoid it. This was human instinct. After retreating dozens of meters, he found that the old man was still looking at them and did not do anything else. Forcefully suppressing the nervousness in his heart, Gray tried to look calm and asked the old man, "Who are you?" "I'm a businessman." Faced with Gray's question, the old man answered. His voice was very calm, neither cold nor gloomy, just like an ordinary old man. However, his empty eyes still made people feel a deep chill. After hesitating for a moment, Gray slowly walked over. How strong was the person who could create such a large anomaly? Barbarian level? Or desolate level? Or even stronger? He was definitely stronger than him. He could not even escape. If that was the case, he might as well cooperate. Sophia and Teresa glanced at each other, and then they also walked over. "You want to make a deal with me?" Walking to the stall, Gray's palms were sweating. He took out the metal ball and showed it to the old man. The old man nodded and said, "Yes, I want to make a deal with you." Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Lousy waved his hand in front of him, and 3 items appeared out of thin air, floating in the air. "I will use one of these 3 items to exchange for the item in your hand." Gray looked at the 3 items floating in the air. He did not say that he did not want to exchange. Although the old man in front of him looked kind, if he did not go along with the old man's wishes, there might be serious consequences. Moreover, he did not know how to use the silver metal ball in his hand. It was useless to keep in his hand. He might as well use it to exchange for something that could be used. The item on the left was a black metal bracelet. There were some white patterns on the surface of the bracelet. It was mysterious and complicated. After looking at it for a long time, Lin Huang felt a little dizzy. In the middle was a stone sculpture about the size of an adult's palm. The sculpture was full of golden runes. On the right was a leather bag about the size of a money bag. There were many golden patterns on the surface of the leather bag. Of the 3 items, aside from the rightmost item that looked very similar to Sophia's runic space bag, Gray couldn't tell the specific purpose of the other 2 items, whether it was the sculpture or the black bracelet. After hesitating for a while, Gray braced himself and said to the old man, "Sir, can you introduce these 3 items to me?" Since it was a deal, he should at least let the buyer know the specific use of the items. "Sure." The old man nodded and started to introduce them from the left. Hallucination bracelet. It can make the opponent fall into an illusion unknowingly. Rune Puppet. After it is activated, it can be turned into a battle weapon. Rune Space Bag. It can store items. The old man's introduction was very brief. He did not specify the grade of the weapon, the combat power of the Rune Puppet, or the size of the Rune Space Bag. If he was a businessman, this was very unqualified. However, none of the three people present dared to accuse the old man of being unqualified. Hallucination Weapon, Rune Puppet, and Rune Space Bag? Gray frowned and did not ask further. He did not know what would happen if he made the old man impatient. Based on the introduction, the three items were very practical. He could not make up his mind on which item to choose. Which one do you think I should choose? Gray turned to look at Sophia. He hoped that she could use her knowledge from a great aristocratic family to judge which item was the most valuable. Sophia looked at the old man. After seeing that the old man had no objections, she raised her eyebrows and said, I suggest you choose the Rune Space Bag. Of course, it's only a suggestion. It's up to you to choose the Rune Space Bag. Gray nodded and made a decision in his heart. He looked at the old man and said, He looked at the Rune Space Bag and said, I choose the Rune Space Bag. In his heart, he was rather biased towards the Rune Space Bag. After hearing Sophia's suggestion, he chose it without hesitation. Although a weapon with hallucination abilities was a very special weapon, it was not impossible for him to obtain similar abilities in the future, since he could obtain the ability from consuming the blood of the blood fiends. As for the combat puppet, he did not dare to choose because he could not determine its combat power. Although this item was very rare, it did not mean that its combat power was very strong. It only meant that there were fewer and fewer rune masters who knew how to make this item. Some of the weaker combat puppets only had the combat power of a ferocious blood warrior. They were not even qualified to guard the house of the Fergus family. They could not even compare to the blood fiends that he could control. On the other hand, even the smallest Rune Space Bag was extremely valuable. Only the Marquis family had the ability to obtain it. Also, if this item had a large space, he might be able to bring the blood fiends with him in the future. Then he would have a group of thugs by his side at all times. Sure, the old man nodded in agreement. Without seeing him do anything, the other two items disappeared. The Rune Space Bag that was suspended in the air floated towards Gray. The silver metal ball in Gray's hand also floated up and flew towards the old man. Gray subconsciously took the Rune Space Bag. Poof! Then it was as if a layer of membrane had been pierced through. The old man and the stall in front of him slowly disappeared like mist. The noise that had disappeared on the street slowly returned to normal. From afar to near, it slowly returned to normal. When Gray and the other two regained their senses, they had already reappeared on the noisy street. There was a noisy crowd around them. Their carriage was parked on the street far away. The three of them looked at each other and hurriedly returned to the carriage. They drove the carriage away from the street as if they were fleeing. Chapter 2:16. Whoosh! The carriage drove far away from the street. After making sure that they were far away, Sophia and Gray heaved a sigh of relief. Although the other party didn't seem to have any intention of taking their lives and didn't make things difficult for them, the feeling of not being able to control their lives still made them feel very depressed. No one liked to entrust their lives to others, especially people like Gray and Sophia, who were very powerful at such a young age. It was only then that Gray had the time to check the Rune Space Bag in his hand. It was more than 10 centimeters long and 6 or 7 centimeters wide. It looked like an extremely ordinary leather bag. However, there were many densely packed, golden lines on its surface. They were extremely complicated. After untying the rope of the leather bag, Gray opened the bag and looked inside. What entered his eyes was darkness. He could not see anything, as if no light could penetrate it. He tried to throw a gold coin in, but the gold coin disappeared instantly. However, it was still dark inside. He could not see a trace of the gold coin at all. He turned the Rune Space Bag around and tried to pour the gold coin out. However, he found that nothing came out. It was as if there was nothing inside. It was empty. How do I use the Rune Space Bag? Gray had no choice but to look at Sophia for help. Although he had heard of the Rune Space Bag, he did not know how to use it. Like just now, when he threw something in and could not take it out again, it was obviously not the correct way to use it. At this time, he could only humbly ask for help. The golden veins have a central node that connects all the veins. Find this central node and pour in a sliver of blood energy from there, Sophia said. Gray searched according to her instructions. Soon, he found a central node on one side of the leather bag. It was obvious that the other golden patterns extended from this location. Without hesitation, Gray poured a trace of blood force into it. Buzz! Gray immediately felt that he had established some kind of connection with the rune space bag. His vision, or rather his consciousness, entered a space. It was a square space about 10 meters in length and width. In the space, a gold coin floated quietly. He had just put it in. It's so big. Seeing such a huge space, Gray could not help but feel happy. He had made the right choice in choosing the rune space bag. Such a huge space could definitely fit 4 mad-level blood beasts. When needed, he could immediately turn the 4 mad-level blood beasts into a fighting force. In addition to his own powerful strength, he was not afraid of facing 3 or 4 mad-level blood beasts. How do I take things out? Following Gray's thought, the gold coin disappeared from the space. In the outside world, a gold coin suddenly appeared and fell into the carriage. He picked up the gold coin and placed it on his palm. With a thought, the gold coin disappeared again, and another gold coin appeared in the air. Good stuff. After taking and putting in a few times, Gray couldn't help but feel satisfied. Not only was the space big, but it was also very convenient to take things out. As long as the distance was not more than 20 centimeters, it could be put into the rune space bag. And the things that were put into the rune space bag could be controlled to appear anywhere within 20 centimeters. After putting the luggage and the carriage into the rune space bag, Gray hung the rune space bag on his waist. However, he immediately felt that it was too ostentatious, so he took it off and put it into the inner pocket of his clothes. How is it? How big is the space? Sophia looked over and asked. It's 100 cubic meters in total, 10 meters in length and width. Gray replied, It's really big. Sophia nodded and said, as if she had expected this. An ordinary rune space bag is only a few cubic meters in size. The bigger ones will be dozens of cubic meters. It's very rare to see a 100 cubic meter one like the one in your hand. Hearing Sophia's words, Gray felt that he had earned a lot this time. Sure enough, this rune space bag was the most suitable for him. He couldn't help but think of the mysterious specter merchant from before. After thinking about it, he asked, What else do you know about the specter merchant from before? Seeing that Gray was interested in the specter merchant, Sophia didn't keep him in suspense. I don't know much, but I do know a guess about the other party. What guess? Gray couldn't help but ask curiously. The other party might not be from this era, Sophia said with a slightly serious expression. Not from this era? What do you mean? Gray's eyes widened, and there was a trace of horror in his heart. Someone found some well-preserved books in the ruins of the Empire, and among these books, there were already records of the specter merchant. Sophia glanced at Gray and said cautiously, There were records of the specter merchant during the Empire? Gray sucked in a breath of cold air. From the Empire to the present, there was at least 1,000 years of history. If the other party had lived from then until now, wouldn't it be more than 1,000 years old? Could a person really live for more than 1,000 years? He had heard of blood fiends that had lived for more than 1,000 years, but this was the first time he had heard of a person. Could it be that the specter merchant was referring to an organization, and this organization already existed during the Empire? Gray didn't believe that anyone could live for more than 1,000 years, so he raised his doubts. Some people have guessed so, but Sophia changed the topic, looked at Gray, and said seriously, According to the records in the books, when the specter merchant appeared, they were all in the image of an old man, and their eyes were also pitch black like today. The image of an old man, pitch black eyes. Gray's heart was full of horror. If the specter merchant was referring to an organization, then the external characteristics of the people in this organization couldn't all be in the image of an old man, and their eyes were pitch black. Although he didn't want to believe it, if the records were true, this specter merchant was likely to be an antique that had lived for more than 1,000 years. Can a person really live for more than 1,000 years? After a while, Gray came back to his senses, looked at Sophia, and asked, I don't know. Sophia shook her head. But I heard that king-level warriors live longer than ordinary people. It seems that there were king-level warriors who eventually lived to more than 200 years old. Stronger existences can definitely live longer than that. Stronger existences than king-level warriors? Gray thought of all kinds of mysterious rumors about the Empire 1,000 years ago. It was rumored that the strength of the Empire 1,000 years ago was stronger than the current 4 kingdoms combined. If this was true, then there must be existences beyond the king level. Such existences definitely had a longer lifespan than king-level warriors. Maybe they really could have lived from the Empire to the present. The Empire was destroyed, but the Spectre Merchant has lived from the Empire to the present. Could the Spectre Merchant? Suddenly, Gray's eyes widened in surprise, and he thought of a problem. The Empire encountered a great disaster. Under this disaster, the Empire was completely destroyed, and there was even a serious historical gap. The families and forces that appeared now all appeared after the Empire was destroyed. However, the Spectre Merchant had already existed during the Empire and lived to the present. He was someone who had truly witnessed the destruction of the Empire, and it was very likely that he was related to the destruction of the Empire. Even if he was not the mastermind, he was most likely a participant in the destruction of the Empire. The 4 kingdoms have always adopted a lockdown attitude regarding the Empire, as if they are afraid of something. Could it be that they are afraid of the Spectre Merchant? Gray felt a trace of cold sweat slide down his back. To be able to make the 4 kingdoms afraid, it had to be an extremely powerful existence or force. The Spectre Merchant was clearly such an existence. If the 4 kingdoms were afraid of the Spectre Merchant, then everything made sense. He couldn't help but look towards Sophia. If he could think of this, could it be that Sophia couldn't? Facing Gray's gaze, Sophia seemed to see that Gray was thinking of something. She slightly shook her head. Although she did not speak, her meaning was very clear. Do not say it. Some things could not be said, even if it was just a guess, especially in this situation. Although the Spectre Merchant had disappeared in front of the 3 of them, it was possible that he was using some method to monitor the 3 of them. Chapter 217. After spending a night in the city, Gray and the other 2 hurriedly left the city the next morning. Faced with the unknown and an undefeatable existence, people would naturally want to avoid it. Even Gray and the other 2 who were not weak were no exception. Or rather, it was because Gray and the other 2 were not weak that they wanted to avoid it. Unlike ordinary people, they were already used to controlling their own lives and deciding the lives of others. Their lives being controlled by someone else was something they could not tolerate no matter what. Fortunately, they did not meet the other party along the way. It was probably because they did not have anything valuable on them that the other party did not care about them. The 3 of them sighed softly and spent the night in cities and towns along the way. 2 days later, the 3 of them were close to the night forest. Creak, creak, the carriage traveled on the winding, muddy road. Suddenly, a sharp screech entered the ears of the 3 people. The sound was sonorous and powerful, with a strong metallic texture that was extremely ear-piercing. Hearing this strange sound, Gray and the other 2's expressions couldn't help but change. Teresa stopped the carriage and looked in the direction of the sound. Gray and Sophia also lifted the curtains and looked over. In a village in the distance, black smoke curled up. In many places in the village, there were billowing black smoke drifting up. A few hundred meters above the village, a large bird with a wingspan of 4 meters and full of blue feathers was circling rapidly in the air. It swooped down from time to time, and when it rose again, there was an additional villager struggling in its claws. Ah, no. The villager struggled in fear, but the large bird's claws sank deeply into his flesh, making it impossible for him to break free. The more he struggled, the more pain he felt. The large bird rose rapidly and soon rose to a few hundred meters in the air. Then, suddenly, it released the sharp claws that were holding on to the villager. A bang! The villager fell from the sky and screamed in horror. However, a clear muffled sound was heard, and the screams stopped abruptly. It was obvious what would happen to the villager who was thrown down. Not to mention the villagers. Even Gray and the others would not be able to survive if they fell from such a high height. Other than becoming minced meat, there was no other possibility. It's a blood fiend. Seeing this scene, the expressions of Gray and the other two could not help but change slightly. Without a doubt, there was no other possibility other than a flying blood fiend for it to have such a huge body and be able to easily lift a human into the sky. Although blood fiends had a strong territorial division and would normally live in the depths of the forest, it did not mean that blood fiends would not leave the forest. Occasionally, the blood fiends would leave the forest and attack the surrounding villages due to failure in battle or hunting. The current situation should be like this. Every year, no less than 100,000 people were killed in the Purple Moon Kingdom alone because of this situation. And now, Gray and the others had encountered such a situation. Let's go. Without much hesitation, Gray and the other two, G got off the carriage and ran in that direction. If they didn't stop it, everyone in the village would be killed. If the mercenaries who entered the forest were attacked by the blood fiends, they would naturally ignore them. After all, since the other party had chosen to become mercenaries and entered the dangerous forest, they should be prepared to face life and death situations. Everyone had to pay the price for their choices. However, these villagers were different. They did not invade the blood fiends' territory. To them, the blood fiends were simply an unexpected disaster. Run, hide in the house. As they approached the village, the three of them heard terrified voices. Faced with such an unstoppable crisis, some of the villagers fled in panic, while others were so frightened that they fell to the ground, creating a puddle of water on the ground. Swoosh! The flying blood fiend swooped down again. When it was close to the ground, a blue bolt of lightning suddenly shot out from its mouth. Crackle! A wooden house was hit, and a raging fire immediately burst into the house. Black smoke filled the air, and the villagers who were hiding in the wooden houses coughed violently as they fled in fear. At this moment, the flying blood fiend suddenly swooped down on a 7- or 8-year-old child. Its sharp claws directly tore through the child's soft skin and pierced into the child's back. Amidst the child's blood-curdling screams, it suddenly rose up. Bang! Another muffled sound rang out, and another pile of meat paste appeared in the village. At this moment, Gray and the other two had just approached the village, and they were unable to stop it in time. It's a thunder eagle. Hearing the child's blood-curdling screams, Gray frowned slightly. Through the blood fiend's ability and appearance, he determined that this blood fiend was a murderous level blood fiend, Thunder Eagle. Don't be in a hurry to attack. If it escapes, this village will be completely finished. Hearing the child's blood-curdling screams, Sophia's face turned slightly ashen, but she still reminded them. Got it. Gray and Teresa nodded in understanding. The Thunder Eagle was only a murderous level blood fiend, and its combat strength was not considered strong among the murderous level blood fiends. However, it had the ability to fly. If they could not kill it completely and let it escape, it would probably return to take revenge on this village. Furthermore, the three of them could not possibly stay here to protect this village. It would be fine if they came across some helpers, but it was absolutely impossible for them to stay and protect these people. The three of us will go to the open space to attract its attention. Once it's attracted, we will attack together. Teresa suggested. Gray and Sophia nodded, and the three of them quickly arrived at an open space in the village. Caw, caw. The villagers were basically hiding in their houses, and the appearance of Gray and the other two in the open space naturally attracted the Thunder Eagle's attention. The Thunder Eagle screeched excitedly, and its eyes were filled with bloodthirsty excitement. It swooped down toward Gray and the other two. Many blood fiends had the urge to kill. They attacked other animals not to hunt for food, but to satisfy their thirst for blood. Obviously, this Thunder Eagle was one of them. As it swooped down at high speed, a sharp screech could be heard in the air. Before it even got close, a strong wind blew. Its purple claws looked like they were made of metal, and they looked extremely sharp. 100 meters, 70 meters, 30 meters, 20 meters, 10 meters. The sharp claws of the thunder eagle were clearly visible, and its target was Teresa. In the blink of an eye, it was already close to her. Looking at the thunder eagle swooping down toward her, Teresa's expression was cold. With a low growl, the battle axe in her hand was suddenly surrounded by green light. With a step, she dodged the thunder eagle's claws and then swung her battle axe at the thunder eagle's abdomen. Puff! The battle axe cut open the thunder eagle's abdomen, leaving a long wound. Fresh blood spurted out. Screech! The thunder eagle, which was originally its prey, suddenly resisted and was injured. It screeched in horror, and its wings quickly pressed down, and its body quickly climbed up. Swish! At this moment, a green wind blade appeared and quickly slashed at the thunder eagle that was climbing up. Puff! Crack! Crack! Another huge wound appeared on the thunder eagle's body, and immediately, cold ice spread to the surroundings. Affected by the cold ice, the thunder eagle's rising momentum stopped. It spread its wings and flew away. Whoosh! At this moment, a long spear surrounded by purple light was suddenly thrown out from Sophia's hand, and it pierced through the thunder eagle in the sky. Puff! Boom! The thunder eagle was pierced by the long spear, and then it was as if a bomb had suddenly exploded in the thunder eagle's body. Many bloody holes appeared on its body, and blood splattered from all parts of its body. A large number of its internal organs were also shattered. Pung! Without any struggle, the Thunderhawk fell from the sky and smashed heavily into the ground. It was as dead as it could be. Sophia walked over and pulled out the long spear from the Thunder Eagle's body. Gray looked at the long spear in Sophia's hand and was slightly surprised. Explosive attribute. If Gray's guess was correct, the attribute of the other party's long spear should be explosive. A weapon with such an attribute, after piercing into the target's body, would produce an effect similar to a bomb. It would explode in the target's body, and its destructive power was extremely strong. After all, generally speaking, the internal organs were more fragile than the outside. That monster is dead. Those 3 nobles killed that monster. So strong. Those 3 nobles are so strong to actually be able to kill such a powerful monster. The villagers who were hiding in their houses and looking outside in fear were shocked. Some of them were even dumbfounded. Such a powerful monster had actually died so easily in the hands of these 3 nobles. How strong were these 3 nobles? Ferocious blood warriors. They must be ferocious blood warriors. An old man who had been a mercenary when he was young and had seen the world said excitedly. This immediately made the surrounding few young people look at Gray and the other 2 with admiration. Ferocious blood warriors. These 3 nobles were actually powerful, ferocious blood warriors. Even the strongest overlord in their territory was rumored to be only an upper-level ferocious blood warrior. But these 3 nobles were powerful, ferocious blood warriors. For a moment, the villagers who heard the news were shocked. Without any contact with the villagers who had survived the disaster, Gray and the other 2 quickly left the village. Chapter 218. On the same day, Gray and the other 2 arrived at a small town near the night forest. After resting for a night, they spent some money to leave the carriage in a tavern in the small town. The 3 of them bought a lot of things for camping and stuffed them all into their rune space bags. Then, they walked towards the night forest. The benefits of the rune space bag were evident at this moment. It was indeed a necessity for traveling. The night forest lived up to its name. In the forest, the light was extremely dim. Above their heads, there were towering tree crowns that bloomed like giant umbrellas. The 3 of them walked in the forest. It was as if they were walking under dark rain clouds. It was extremely gloomy and depressing. However, the 3 of them were not ordinary people. Naturally, they would not be affected by the atmosphere. Following the markings on the map, the 3 of them walked straight into the forest. Along the way, many ferocious-looking wild beasts fell under their sharp blades. In the process, they also met some mercenaries on the outskirts of the forest. They hunted wild beasts and sold their skins for profit. Of course, there were also mercenaries who acted as bandits occasionally. They robbed and killed other mercenaries and turned the other mercenaries' gains into their own. However, such things did not happen to Gray and the other two. Seeing the clothes that Gray and the other two were wearing, these mercenaries did not have the slightest intention to provoke them. As mercenaries, they naturally had good eyesight. The clothes that Gray and the other two were wearing were obviously expensive. How could these people not see that Gray and the other two were not to be trifled with? Gray and the other two did not bother to pay attention to them. They ran straight towards their destination, leaving a trail of wild beast corpses along the way. While moving forward, Gray suddenly turned around and quickly rushed in the direction they came from. Like him, Sophia and Teresa did the same. After rushing for a few dozen meters, they saw 5 people in leather armor in front of them. There were middle-aged men and young men among them. Seeing Gray and the other two suddenly rushing over, the 5 people's expressions changed drastically. Their faces suddenly turned pale, and they subconsciously retreated. Whoosh! Gray flashed out like lightning and appeared behind the 5 people. The sword in his hand was placed on the neck of the middle-aged man at the back. "No, don't kill us." The middle-aged man's body trembled as he spoke in a terrified tone. "Speak. Why are you following us?" Gray and the other two looked at the 5 with unfriendly gazes. Gray and the other two had seen these 5 people before. Half an hour ago, they had encountered these 5 people in the dark forest. At that time, they didn't pay much attention to them, thinking that they were just ordinary mercenaries. They didn't expect the 5 of them to secretly tail them. The vegetation in the night forest was too lush. In addition, the 5 of them had been in the forest for a long time and were very experienced, so they did not notice it immediately. Gray and the other two raised their eyebrows as they understood the purpose of these 5 mercenaries. Presumably, these 5 mercenaries saw that although the 3 of them had killed the wild beasts, they did not care about the fur of the wild beasts. Thinking of picking up the scraps, they followed the 3 of them all the way. "You really value money over your life." Teresa shook her head playfully. He clearly knew that the 3 of them were not to be trifled with, yet he still dared to tail them all the way. He was simply a typical example of someone who valued money over life. If it had been someone else with a bad temper, the 5 of them would have been killed before they even had the chance to explain themselves. "Let's go." Ignoring the 5 of them, Gray and the other two left without saying a word. They thought that this trip to the ruins had been targeted by some forces. Since it was just 5 ordinary mercenaries, they were too lazy to pay attention to them. As for the 5 of them having the intention of picking up scraps, they were even more too lazy to care. Money was a good thing, but one needed to be alive to spend it. After Gray and the other two walked away, the 5 people who were scared pale looked at each other. After a long time, someone said, "Captain, should we follow them?" As the captain of the 5, a middle-aged man looked hesitant. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, "Follow." In just half an hour, they had already harvested no less than 10 pieces of fur. This was almost equivalent to their previous harvest of a few days of hard work. If they could continue to follow, the money they earned after this trip might be equivalent to their previous harvest of a month. He really didn't want to give up such an opportunity. Moreover, he also saw that the 3 of them did not care about their scraps. The 5 of them followed Gray and the other 2 from afar, all the way into the depths of the night forest. After a few hours, they were already deep in the night forest. The 5 of them were carrying the furs on their backs. The amount of furs was equivalent to more than a month's worth of furs. In addition, the wild beasts they killed were all killed in one blow, so the furs were extremely well preserved. If they were to sell them, it would probably be equivalent to a few months of income. The 3 of them were overjoyed. This time, they would definitely be able to make a lot of money. However, there was some uneasiness in their hearts. They felt that this depth was too deep. "Captain, we are already very deep in the night forest. If we continue to go deeper, I'm afraid we will encounter blood fiends," one of the young mercenaries said worriedly. "Follow for another half an hour." As the captain, the middle-aged man gritted his teeth. In the end, he was still overcome by greed. After half an hour, they once again harvested quite a lot. They already had a vague feeling that something was wrong. The frequency of wild beasts appearing was too high. Just as they were about to retreat, look, that's... In front of them, there was a huge monster that was close to 3 meters in length, lying quietly in a pool of blood. It was already dead. It's a blood fiend. It's a blood fiend. The 5 of them were ecstatic. Their eyes were filled with surprise. Without hesitation, they ran over. They took out their water bottles to collect the blood and painstakingly peeled off the blood fiend's overly sturdy fur. We're rich. We're rich. The 5 of them were extremely excited. As long as they sold the blood fiend's blood and fur, they would immediately become rich. In the future, they would no longer have to be dangerous mercenaries. They could spend some money to open a shop and become small merchants. The rest of their lives would be comfortable. Roar! At this moment, a roar was heard. The 5 of them looked up in horror and saw a tiger-shaped blood fiend appear. Puff! Before the 5 of them could react, one of their heads was bitten off by the tiger-shaped blood fiend. Fresh blood spurted out like a fountain from the neck where the head had been severed. The remaining 4 screamed in horror and fled in panic. The 2 young men even smelled of urine. However, it was extremely difficult to escape from a blood fiend. In just a moment, their screams of horror and terror had stopped. What's the use of money if you're dead? Hearing the screams of horror and despair behind them, Gray and the other 2 could naturally guess what had happened. However, the 3 of them had no intention of returning to help. Instead, they walked straight ahead. They helped the villagers because they had suffered an unexpected disaster. As for the 5 mercenaries, they had brought it upon themselves. After a few hours, the sky gradually darkened. Gray and the other 2 stopped, set up a tent, and lit a bonfire. They had to prepare dinner before the sky turned dark. Otherwise, when night fell, the bonfire would easily attract wild beasts. The 3 of them had barbecued meat for dinner. They roasted the Thunder Eagle's meat that had been processed in town yesterday. Teresa was the one who cooked it. Although she had a big beard, she was quite good at roasting meat. After dinner, the 3 of them were assigned to guard the night. As usual, we'll take turns to guard the night. Each of us will guard for 4 hours. Gray was responsible for the first half of the night, Teresa for the middle, and Sophia for the morning. At night, the purple moon in the sky sprinkled down strands of purple moonlight. However, the moonlight could not penetrate the night forest. The night forest was dark, but it was not as peaceful as one would imagine. From time to time, the roars of beasts could be heard. Those were nocturnal animals hunting and being hunted. Gray was wearing a thick overcoat. He was sitting on a green rock near the tent. In his hand, there was a simple rune lamp, but he did not turn it on. Beside him, there was an hourglass. When the scale in the hourglass dropped by 4 scales, he could wake up Teresa and change shifts with her. Sigh, it's really unbearable. The wait was long. After waiting for a long time, he looked at the hourglass and realized that less than 2 scales had passed. It was extremely unbearable. At times like this, the benefits of corpse control are revealed. Gray could not help but think of using corpse control to replace the night watch. Although Gray was unable to control the 4 blood fiends due to the distance, he could break the connection with one blood fiend and regain control of the others. However, he was still somewhat wary of the 2 of them. Hence, he was unwilling to reveal his corpse control ability, even if it would make them think that he had a magical weapon that could control corpses. Otherwise, he could use corpse control to replace the 3 of them on night watch. Rustle, rustle, rustle. Suddenly, the sound of leaves being pushed aside was heard. Gray looked over. Even at night, his infrared perception allowed him to clearly see the approaching creature. An ordinary leopard? In his infrared perception, the silhouette of a leopard appeared in front of him. Judging from its size, it should be an ordinary leopard. Whoosh! Gray, who was sitting on the stone slab a moment ago, pounced over and appeared beside the leopard in the blink of an eye. Woo crack! The sound of bones being broken was heard. This unlucky leopard did not even have time to make a sound before its neck was broken by Gray. He did not use a sword because it would create the smell of blood and attract more predators. Dragging the leopard back, Gray threw the corpse of the leopard in the camp and prepared it for tomorrow's breakfast. He sat on the stone slab again and continued his night watch. After enduring for more than 2 hours, Gray woke Teresa up and went into his tent. A wave of tiredness came over him, and he fell asleep in a daze. However, in the middle of the night, he suddenly heard a huge commotion. A woo! A roar seemed to be right in front of him. He suddenly quivered and jumped up. He rushed out of the tent and looked outside. Chapter 219. The blood fiend's entire body was pitch black, and its body was fat and bulky. Its black fur was covered with arrow-like black thorns, making it look like a target full of arrows. Its exposed canine teeth were turned upward, forming the shape of fangs. They were eerily white and looked extremely sharp, causing one's heart to involuntarily tremble. Berserk blood fiend, wild boar. A voice rang out. Like Gray, the one who spoke was Sophia, who had just rushed out of the tent. Seeing this blood fiend, her expression turned solemn. Thump, thump, thump. Just as Gray and Sophia rushed out of the tent, the wild boar, confronting Teresa, began to move. It was like a huge black boulder, shaking the ground as it rushed toward Teresa. Teresa held the battle axe and suddenly growled. Facing the charging wild boar, she didn't dodge. Like a heavy tank, she madly rushed out and charged toward the wild boar. Green light surrounded the battle axe as it suddenly chopped down. Bang! The battle axe chopped down on the wild boar's head, causing blood to splatter wildly as a large wound appeared. Not only that, but under Teresa's axe, the charging wild boar was actually forced back. In terms of strength, Teresa was actually stronger than the berserk blood beast wild boar. Berserk warrior. A trace of surprise flashed across Gray's face. Without a doubt, with this kind of strength, Teresa was definitely a genuine berserk warrior. Was she already a berserk warrior, or did she become one in the past year? With this thought in mind, Gray quickly rushed toward the wild boar that had been sent flying. Now wasn't the time to think about this. Whoosh! The magic sword in his hand flickered with lightning. In the night, Gray was like a bolt of lightning as he quickly approached the wild boar and chopped at its neck. Crackle! Under Gray's sword, the wild boar was chopped to the side and slid down. A deep wound appeared on his throat, but there was no blood gushing out because the area around it had already been scorched by the lightning. Under the lightning, its body trembled. However, although the wild boar had received Gray's sword, it did not die because of this. The thick layer of fat all over its body was as tough as the elite battle armor of the Blood Warriors. As a result, even though Gray's sword had cut into his neck, it was still unable to damage his throat or blood vessels. Whoosh! At this moment, a figure flashed past Gray's side. Sophia's burst of speed was not inferior to Gray's. Catching up to the flying wild boar, a purple light revolved around his spear, and the spear pierced the wild boar's throat. The strength displayed by Sophia was shockingly that of a berserker. Puff! The long spear pierced into the wound that Gray had created and continued to penetrate deeper. Then a purple light suddenly exploded like a bomb, exploding from the throat. Boom! With a loud explosion, a huge explosion-shaped hole appeared in the wild boar's throat. Red blood splattered wildly. With a hole in its throat, the wild boar looked like it would not survive. However, the wild boar did not die immediately. Instead, it struggled to get up angrily and launched a counterattack before its death. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The black thorns all over its body suddenly trembled, and then all of them left its body and pierced toward Gray's group. The scene was extremely spectacular, as if hundreds of thousands of arrows were shooting toward Gray's group. Not good. Having no time to be surprised that Sophia was also a blood warrior, Gray's speed suddenly exploded, and he hurriedly retreated. Like him, Teresa also retreated. As if avoiding a snake or a scorpion, she retreated. Puff, 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 puff. The black thorns were as hard as refined steel needles and were extremely penetrative. The penetrative power of each one was stronger than that of a sniper rifle from Gray's previous life. They stabbed into the ground and directly pierced through trees. Even some of the mountain rocks in the forest were pierced through without exception. Clang, clang. Gray brandished his sword and slashed away a black thorn that was shooting toward his stomach. He then used his left arm, which he had inherited from the iron arm ape, to block another blackthorn. During the process, he continuously retreated and finally retreated out of the blackthorn's attack range, successfully defending against this wave of arrow rain. He gave his wrist, which could block 10 attacks from a blood warrior, to Viscount Fergus, who needed it more. After all, he still needed to guard against the Shadow Serpent. Fortunately, the distance was rather far. Grey's speed was quite fast among the blood fiends, and the iron arm ape's arm was indeed very powerful. Even in the face of the blood fiend's ability, he was able to block it without any damage. Otherwise, although he would not be seriously injured with the defensive characteristics of the Jade Lizard, he would definitely suffer some minor injuries. His gaze involuntarily turned towards Sophia's direction. Among the three of them, Sophia was the closest to the wild boar and was in the most danger. However, the moment the wild boar unleashed the blackthorn, he did not think of saving the beauty. With his speed, he could completely block in front of Sophia before the blackthorn could reach her. With the powerful defense that he had inherited from the Jade Lizard, he could block the black arrow rain with minor injuries. However, he did not do so. On one hand, their relationship was only ordinary, and it was not worthwhile for him to go to this extent for her. On the other hand, he did not think that this kind of arrow rain would be able to hurt her. Although he did not understand Sophia's identity, it was inevitable that she came from an extraordinary background. How could she not have some kind of self-defense method? Grey even faintly felt that among the three of them, the one with the strongest self-defense ability was not him, who had the iron arm ape's iron arm and the Jade Lizard's powerful defense. As long as she did not immediately die, she could save herself through reverse nurturing. Rather, it was most likely Sophia. As expected, the moment he saw Sophia, Grey was even more certain of his guess. She was dressed in a purple lady's battle attire, and there was not a trace of injury on her body. Her surroundings were full of holes left behind by the blackthorn, but there was not a single black thorn on her body. He could not tell what kind of method she had used in that instant to dodge or block the wild boar's blackthorn attack. Not far in front of her, the wild boar's huge body had already fallen to the ground, and it could not be more dead. So close, so close. Teresa's voice came from behind Grey. Grey looked back and saw that she was also unharmed. Grey was not surprised by this. Among the three of them, Teresa was the furthest away from the wild boar. Since Grey was not injured, it was not surprising that she was not injured either. "Oh, young master is not bad. You're already a berserker." Seeing Grey's gaze, Teresa walked forward and laughed. However, there was a trace of caution in his eyes. When his miss had suggested inviting the other party to explore the ruins, he had not taken the other party's battle strength into account. After all, compared to himself and his miss, who were already berserkers, the other party was only a ferocious blood warrior. Her role in the exploration was negligible. Since his miss insisted, he could not refute. However, in his heart, he had already limited the other party's role to night watch. Having two people on night watch was indeed too difficult. One more night watch was also good. Now, it seemed that he had underestimated the other party. She had actually become a berserker like his miss. Ignoring the other party's teasing, Grey walked towards the wild boar. He had to deal with it as soon as possible, or else it would attract other predators. Although the three of them were berserkers and did not fear ordinary blood fiends, it was best if they did not encounter them. After all, it was now late at night. Not being disturbed and having a good night's sleep were the most important things. Walking to the side of the wild boar, Sophia was already using a rune bag to collect blood. Grey hurriedly took out a rune bag and collected blood from the other side. During the process, he could not help but look at Sophia again. The other party's age was not much different from his, but he did not expect her to become a berserker like him. The reason he could become a berserker so quickly was because of his transformation. If he did not have the ability to transform, he would not have been able to become a ferocious blood warrior, let alone a berserker. On the contrary, the other party had become a berserker so quickly, which made him have a whole new level of respect for her. After all, the other party certainly did not have the ability to transform. However, when he thought of the other party's mysterious background, he felt relieved. Given the other party's background, The resources she could obtain would definitely be 10 times or even 100 times better than his. Perhaps when she was a ferocious blood warrior, she had already extravagantly used the blood of berserker-level blood fiends as a means of cultivation. Under such circumstances, it would be strange if the speed of her advancement was not fast. Of course, Sophia's own talent was probably not bad. Otherwise, no matter how rich the resources were, it would be impossible for her to become a berserker so quickly. Could it be that she comes from a duke's family? Gray secretly guessed the other party's identity. From the things she had displayed so far, the other party's background and influence were certainly very deep. It was very likely that she came from a duke's family that was even more powerful than the Marquis family. It was rumored that the three great dukes' families had once produced royal blood warriors, so one could imagine how deep their foundations were. If she was born in such a family, it would not be surprising for her to have such a speed of advancement. My rune space bag is too small to hold it, so I'll leave this ferocious boar's corpse to you. It was as if she had not noticed Gray's courage, or perhaps she had noticed but did not care. After collecting the blood, Sophia looked at Gray and said with a smile, "Okay." Gray put away the ferocious boar's corpse, but in his heart he felt that the other party had not put away the ferocious boar's corpse because her rune space was too small to hold it. Last time, in the remains, the other party's rune space had been able to hold such a large pile of gold coins. It was reasonable to say that a 4-meter-long ferocious boar should be able to hold it. Gray felt that the other party probably hated putting the blood-soaked ferocious boar into the rune space bag, so she let him do it. Chapter 220. Gray went back to sleep. They did not encounter any more blood fiends in the second half of the night, so he slept soundly until the next morning. The three of them did not pack up their tents and leave immediately after eating a barbecue made of leopard meat. Instead, each of them occupied a position and began to cultivate in the empty space in front of the tent that they had cleared themselves. They did not avoid each other either. For blood techniques of the mad grade and above, the cultivation posture was only external. The most important thing was the internal structure of the totem. If one did not know, they would not be able to cultivate it no matter how hard they tried. Furthermore, without the corresponding formula for the blood essence, they would not even be able to implant a blood vessel, let alone cultivate it. Suddenly, 3 gigantic blood fiends appeared in the open space of the campsite. What Gray summoned was a 5-meter-long phantom of a gale wolf. The blood beast phantom that Teresa had summoned was a huge bull-type blood beast. It was 6 meters long and had 2 horns on its head. Its body seemed to be covered with a layer of stone armor. The blood beast phantom that Sophia had drawn out was a 5-meter-long deer-type blood beast. Its entire body was dark blue, its limbs were slender, its body was fit and beautiful, and its body emitted a mysterious aura. Gray naturally would not let go of the opportunity to observe the blood fiends summoned by Sophia and Teresa. It should be a rock bull. From the surface of the blood fiend summoned by Teresa, Gray deduced that it should be a rock bull barbaric-level blood fiend. It was a type of blood fiend that could petrify its body to increase its defense. It was powerful and had a strong defense. Even if it did not use the blood fiend ability, it should be comparable to the defense of a jade lizard. If it used the blood fiend ability to petrify its body, its defense would be greatly increased. Within a short period of time, few blood fiends of the same level would be able to injure it. Its only weakness was its average speed. However, its strong defense made up for this weakness. Although the blood technique derived from this type of blood fiend was not a special blood technique, it was not far from it. Gray could not help but sigh. As expected of a great aristocratic family, even the blood technique cultivated by their guards was so powerful. What ability does this blood fiend have? On the other hand, Gray didn't have the slightest clue about the blood fiends that Sophia had summoned. Even though he had seen a few descriptions of deer-type blood fiends, they were obviously very different from the one that Sophia had lured out. Judging from the characteristics displayed by Sophia in the previous battle, this kind of deer-type blood fiend was quite fast. In the same realm, it should be able to reach the upper level. As for the rest, he couldn't see anything. However, Gray understood that the blood fiend's ability must be very special. Otherwise, Sophia, a child of a great aristocratic family, would not be able to cultivate such a blood technique. After finishing their morning cultivation and putting away their tents, the three of them quickly set off for their destination. Puff, a pitch-black tiger-shaped blood beast that could produce black fog, had its neck slit by Gray's sword. Blood gushed out violently as the blood beast trembled a few times and fell limp to the ground. Poochie, Teresa chopped off the head of a snake-shaped blood fiend that was more than 10 meters long and covered in a yellowish-brown color. It was capable of attacking people with earth spikes. Boom! A gigantic humanoid bear-shaped blood fiend was pierced by Sophia's spear, and its internal organs were crushed by the explosion's shockwave, killing it. The three of them were all blood warriors. Ordinary blood fiends were nothing in front of them. As a result, even in the depths of the dark forest where blood fiends ran rampant, the three of them were not slow at all. However, the terrain of the forest was complicated. Sometimes they would encounter tall mountains, and other times huge lakes. As a result, their journey was several times longer than a straight line. There's the smell of blood. As they advanced, Gray and the other two couldn't help but stop in their tracks. A faint smell entered their nostrils. It was the smell of blood that they were all too familiar with. Let's go take a look. The three of them walked in the direction of the smell of blood. Since a battle had occurred, there should be blood fiends nearby. They wanted to use the traces of the battle to determine the blood fiend's ability and strength. After walking a few dozen meters to the left, they suddenly saw a wide expanse of land. The huge canopy above their heads disappeared, and large patches of sunlight shone through. However, when they saw the situation at the scene, the three of them couldn't help but raise their eyebrows. In the open space formed by the chopping of trees, more than 10 human corpses were strewn all over the place. They were in various positions of death. Near their corpses, the soil was dyed red with blood and was even slightly moist. It should be a mercenary team that hunts blood fiends. Gray guessed after taking a look at the corpses and discovering that there were many rune bags used to store blood near the corpses. Mercenaries that hunted blood fiends were also known as blood fiend hunters. It could be said to be one of the professions with the most explosive profits. Even the most ordinary murderous blood fiend could be sold for thousands of gold coins. Some of the special blood fiends could even be sold for tens of thousands of gold coins. In comparison, the annual tax income of a Viscount family like the Fergus family was far less than that of these blood fiend hunters. However, the benefits were often directly proportional to the risks involved. The greater the benefits, the greater the danger. Not many blood fiend hunters could live to the end of their lives. Most of them died in the process of hunting blood fiends. The 10 or so people in front of them were evidently one of them. They died no more than an hour ago, Teresa said after flipping over one of the corpses and inspecting the wound. Then, he flipped over a few more corpses and said with a slightly serious expression, "I don't know if it was a blood fiend or a human who did it, but it must be very strong." After flipping over the corpses, without exception, the wounds on their bodies were as if they had been cut through by a sharp blade. The corpses were even directly split into two halves. There was no second attack. Obviously, this was a one-sided slaughter without any ability to resist. For such a situation to occur, it could only be that the opponent's strength far exceeded theirs. How could a mercenary team that dared to come to the depths of the night forest where blood fiends ran rampant be weak? Therefore, the person or blood fiend who did it must be very strong. It should be a blood fiend. Sophia raised her eyebrows and said, it was very likely that it was a blood fiend that appeared in the depths of the forest. The possibility of it being a human was not high. Even if it had a grudge against these 10 or so people, it would have ambushed them in the periphery of the forest and would not have come to the dangerous depths of the forest to kill them. It should be a berserk blood fiend. I'm afraid it's not weak among berserk blood fiends. Should we go around it? Gray said in a low voice. Although this berserk blood fiend was not weak, the three of them were berserk warriors after all. After the battle, the final victory would belong to them. But after all, they were here to explore the ruins and not to hunt blood fiends. It was not worthwhile for them to clash head-on with a powerful blood fiend. That would not be beneficial to them. Let's go around it. Sophia and Teresa nodded. Obviously, their thoughts were the same as Gray's. After inspecting the corpses, they found that there was nothing extremely valuable on them. They must have anticipated the arrival of this day and did not have much money on them. Naturally, the three of them did not think much of it. They left the place and started to go around it. Taking a detour meant going around the area in front and circling around from other areas to the front in an arc. Generally speaking, this method could be used to avoid the blood fiends in the area ahead. Of course, this method might not work every time. Sometimes, before they could go around the area, they would be targeted by the blood fiends in the area. There's a blood fiend. After going around for more than 10 minutes, Gray's infrared perception suddenly discovered a wild beast that seemed to be a blood fiend lurking on a lush tree. The moment he said this, the wild beast that seemed to be a blood fiend scuttled out of the tree and onto a huge branch, appearing in front of Gray and the other two. This was a wild beast that was close to 2 meters long. Its fur was brownish-black, and the neck area connecting its head and torso was very long and thick. On its 2 front limbs were long and sharp claws. They were more than 10 centimeters long and looked like daggers. Be careful. Seeing this wild beast that seemed to be a blood fiend, Sophia's expression suddenly changed and she shouted a warning. Gray and Teresa were both puzzled. They did not understand why this blood fiend that was less than 2 meters long would make Sophia so nervous. However, at this moment, the blood fiend on the tree moved. It raised its 2 front limbs with sharp claws that were surrounded by a green glow. Then, it waved its claws at the 3 of them across the air. Swish, swish, swish. 3 green wind blades that were larger than the wind blades that Gray had used suddenly attacked the 3 of them. Puff, puff, puff. The branches that they encountered along the way were easily chopped off. The 3 wind blades were extremely fast and did not lose their momentum as they slashed at the 3 of them. In the blink of an eye, the wind blades had closed in on the 3 of them. A hair-raising sense of danger rose in the hearts of Gray and the other 2. Not good. The wind blades were already very close. Gray gritted his teeth and raised his arms to block in front of him. It was too late to dodge, so he could only rely on the iron arms that he had inherited from the iron-armed ape to block the attack. Fortunately, the battle with the wild boar last night had given him a lot of confidence in his iron arms. Although they were the iron arms of a murderous level blood fiend, their defense was undeniably strong. Even the wild boar's black thorns could not hurt them in the slightest. Teresa let out a low roar. Suddenly, stony skin appeared all over her body as she used her petrification ability to strengthen her defense. Whoosh! Sophia's body emitted a faint blue glow. Then suddenly, it was as if time had stopped. She leaped out at an unimaginable speed. Chapter 2:21. Clang. The gigantic green wind blade slashed Gray's arms. It was as if a gigantic green metal blade had collided with 2 sturdy titanium alloy arms, producing a sharp sound. Then, Gray was sent flying by the violent force. The armor on his arms had been shattered, and there were shallow wounds on his left and right hands. Wisps of red blood could be seen on them. His arms were injured. Ever since Gray obtained the iron-armed ape's iron-armed characteristics, his arms had never been injured again. Although it was only a minor injury, it was enough to show the power of the gigantic wind blade. In terms of sharpness, it was definitely stronger than the wind blade he used when he was at the mad stage. This blood fiend's power had definitely reached the peak of the mad stage. This was a blood fiend whose combat power was not inferior to the jade lizards. Bang, bang, bang. After breaking several trees in a row, he was finally able to stop. His body was covered in leaves, and he was in a sorry state. The only fortunate thing was that he had the jade lizard's defense, so his body would not be injured in such a collision. Bang, bang, bang. On the other side, at the same time that Gray was struck, Teresa was also struck by the green wind blade. Her armor was easily cut open, and there were obvious scratches on her petrified abdomen. She was sent flying backward by the huge force. Similarly, she broke several trees before coming to a stop. Her body was covered in fallen leaves. The petrification was removed, and blood flowed out from her abdomen. A wound appeared. Even if she could use petrification to increase her defense, she could not help but be injured when faced with such a powerful attack. And in Sophia's direction. Sophia's body was slashed, but the gigantic wind blade did not slow down. It continued to spread forward, and any tree it encountered was easily cut in half. In the end, it continued to spread far and wide. However, Sophia's body did not split in half or spurt out blood. Instead, her figure slowly disappeared. It was only Sophia's afterimage. In an instant, Sophia's speed was enough to leave afterimages. One could imagine how fast she was in that instant. She was the only one among Gray's trio who was not injured. Gray's previous guess was not wrong. In terms of self-preservation ability, Sophia was above Gray. At least in that instant, Gray's skin was broken, but Sophia was not injured at all. Damn it, what kind of blood fiend is this? How could it be so strong? Teresa cursed as she got up in a sorry state. If his body had not been petrified at the critical moment, he might have been split in half. This is a knife weasel. Although it is very small in size, not even as big as some murderous level blood fiends, it is a mad level blood fiend. Moreover, it is extremely powerful among the mad level blood fiends. Sophia said solemnly as she distanced herself from the blood fiend. Knife weasel? Mad level blood fiend. Glancing at his bloodshot arms, Gray's expression turned grave. He couldn't help but think of the dozen or so people from before. If nothing unexpected happened, the dozen or so people should have been killed by the saber weasel in front of him. The three of them wanted to avoid it, but they didn't expect to be unable to. At the same time, he couldn't help but think of something. This knife weasel was obviously a wind-type blood fiend. Moreover, its strength was extremely powerful among the mad-level blood fiends. If he could kill this knife weasel, swallow its blood, and integrate it into the Wind Wolf's blood fiend ability, the power of the Wind Wolf's blood fiend ability would inevitably skyrocket. Although it was only a mad-level blood fiend, and its limit was only at the mad level, which made him a little dissatisfied, it could be used as a backup when he couldn't find the blood of a powerful wind-type barbarian or even stronger blood fiend. This is a little troublesome. We are actually targeted by such a powerful mad-level blood fiend. Teresa's brows were knitted together. She didn't expect to encounter such a troublesome mad-level blood fiend. It's coming again. At this moment, 3 huge green wind blades slashed toward Gray and the other 2. Whoosh, whoosh. With the distance between them and the knife weasel increased, Gray and Sophia had enough time to react. Without using the blood fiend ability, the two of them had already dodged the wind blades by relying on their speed. Patter, patter, patter. However, behind the two of them, a series of sounds of trees collapsing could be heard. All of them had been cut down by the wind blades. Huff, Teresa growled. The battle axe in her hand was surrounded by green light, and she swung it down heavily. Bang! The wind blades were shattered, but he himself was shaken by the strong recoil and retreated a dozen steps. Humph! It wasn't Gray's character to not fight back when attacked. After dodging the wind blades, Gray slashed out an ice wind blade toward the knife weasel. The tree that the knife weasel was standing on was directly split into 2, and ice spread in the cross-section. Although the power of the wind blade was weaker than the knife weasel's wind blades, it was still an attack from a berserker. Naturally, its power wouldn't be much weaker. Bang! The knife weasel wasn't injured because of this. Before the ice wind blade struck, it had nimbly jumped to another tree. However, Gray's attack didn't stop because of this. Failing to hit, the ice wind blade slashed out again. His strength had reached the level of a berserker, and his blood power had greatly increased. He could release a simple ice wind blade several times in a row. Puff, puff, puff. A large number of trees were cut down. The knife weasel could no longer stay on the tree and could only jump to the ground. However, Gray's attack had obviously angered it. 3 huge wind blades slashed straight toward Gray. Clang! Gray quickly dodged, avoiding 2 of them. However, he couldn't dodge the last one. Pulling out the sword at his waist, Gray slashed out with all his strength. Crack! The wind blades were smashed, and Gray was also shaken by the huge destructive power of the wind blades. At this time, Hula, a battle axe chopped down like a mountain. Taking advantage of Gray's fight with the knife weasel, Teresa had already touched the knife weasel. Puff! A deep crack appeared on the ground, spreading all the way to a distance of more than 10 meters. At this critical moment, the knife weasel burst out with a speed that could be ranked in the upper echelon among the berserker blood fiends, and dodged the fierce slash. However, just as it dodged the attack, it suddenly stopped. Whoosh! A long spear with a purple tip, like a cold viper, stabbed toward the place where it appeared. The attacker was Sophia, who had also taken advantage of the fight between Gray and the knife weasel, and approached the knife weasel. In the face of this sudden attack, although the knife weasel panicked and fled, it was still unable to escape Sophia's attack. Stab! The tip of the spear slightly grazed the knife weasel. Although it was just a graze, the explosive force from the spear still sent the knife weasel flying, leaving an explosive wound where the knife weasel was grazed. Drops of dark red blood dripped down. The knife weasel was injured. But this wasn't the end. Facing the knife weasel that was blown up in the air, Gray didn't miss this opportunity and immediately attacked. Whoosh! 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 A blue gust of wind surrounded Gray with cold air, and then suddenly exploded, turning into numerous ice wind blades. Dozens of ice wind blades locked onto the knife weasel's location and densely slashed out. It was no longer just one ice wind blade, but dozens of ice wind blades. He used the blood fiend ability of the gust of wind blade with all his strength. Chirp! The knife weasel, which was flying upside down in the air, sensed the incoming danger and screamed in panic. It wanted to dodge, but it was in the air and had no place to borrow strength. It could only watch the dozens of ice wind blades densely attacking it. Puff! 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 Dozens of wind blades slashed at its body. Its whole body was covered with deep wounds. Wounds crisscrossed all over his body, head, and limbs. Frost flickered near the wounds. That was the cold air ability that Gray inherited from Hanhu, but the effect was greatly reduced because it was facing a berserker blood fiend. Even so, the cold air still made the knife weasel's body slightly stiffen. Thud! The knife weasel fell to the ground powerlessly, trembling as it tried to get up. But due to the cold air and the injuries on its body, it couldn't get up immediately. There was no doubt that the knife weasel was seriously injured. Whoosh! 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 Gray and the other two quickly rushed toward the knife weasel, ready to kill it completely. Chirp! Chirp! At this time, the knife weasel struggled to get up and screamed in anger. As a top existence among the berserker blood fiends, it was the first time it had suffered such a serious injury. This made it furious, extremely furious. It wanted to chop the three enemies in front of it into pieces. Whoosh! 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 Its two sharp forelimbs danced quickly. Suddenly, dozens of huge green wind blades covered the sky and covered the earth, enveloping Gray and the other two. Chapter 222. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Dozens of gigantic wind blades came at them from all directions. They were like a green river, rolling and roaring as if they were going to tear everything in front of them into pieces. Sharp screeches were incessant, and a strong sense of danger assaulted the hearts of Gray and the other two. Bang, bang, bang. Teresa's scalp went numb, and she was instantly petrified. Her body suddenly became harder than steel. The concentrated wind blades slashed his body, leaving crisscrossing wounds on his body. His body was quickly sent flying backward by the slashes. He broke more than 10 trees in a year before finally coming to a stop. There were dozens of wounds all over his body, and dark red blood flowed out, dyeing his entire body red. He was seriously injured. Swoosh! Sophia's body was once again suffused with a strange blue glow, and numerous afterimages appeared. She dodged left and right, quickly avoiding the wind blades. Wind blades brushed past her body, but not a single one was able to hit her. She was like a performer walking on a tightrope. Her movements were graceful, but they were extremely dangerous. If she was not careful, she would be consigned to eternal damnation. Behind her, large swathes of trees were collapsing, destroying everything in their path. I can't block it. Cold sweat rolled down Gray's forehead. With his speed, he would definitely not be able to dodge the wind blades that were so fast and covered such a wide area. The arms of the iron-armed ape were tough, and even in the face of such powerful wind blades, they would only be scratched. However, the wind blades were so concentrated that a pair of iron-armed arms would definitely not be able to protect his entire body. Furthermore, the defensive characteristics inherited from the jade lizard would be too difficult in the face of such powerful wind blades. In the end, even if he could withstand it, he would most likely be seriously injured. Gritting his teeth, Gray made a decision in his heart. Buzz! With Gray as the center, an invisible wave spread out. Then, the surrounding trees and plants suddenly grew crazily, extending huge branches that were as hard as steel. They intertwined to form a wooden fence that was a few meters wide and a meter thick, blocking in front of Gray. At this time, he could not care less about exposing the jade lizard's plant abilities. Fortunately, many of the magical weapons displayed effects that were similar to the Blood Fiend's abilities. After this, if someone were to ask about it, he could use the magical weapons as an excuse. Poof, poof, poof. The huge and sharp wind blades slashed at the wooden fences, which were as hard as steel. The thickness of the wooden fences was quickly shaved off. Only after more than half of the wooden fences were they able to completely block the wind blades that were attacking them. Shoo! Seeing this, Gray heaved a sigh of relief behind the wooden fence. To deal with such a powerful and special Blood Fiend, the only way was to use the special Blood Fiend's Blood Fiend ability. Without using his plant abilities, he was not strong enough to fight against the special Blood Fiends. Humph, trying to escape? Using his plant abilities, Gray was able to control everything within a 100-meter radius. Even without using his eyes, he could see everything that was happening in this area. He immediately noticed that Blade Weasel was preparing to escape. Swish! 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 Several pieces of wood turned into spikes and shot out. Poof, poof, poof. The severely injured Blade Weasel was no longer as agile as before. It was immediately nailed to the ground by the spikes. After struggling for a while, it finally stopped moving. Uncle Teresa, please go and confirm it. Gray turned around and looked at Teresa, who was covered in blood but was not in a life-threatening state. Among the three of them, Teresa had the strongest defense. It was best for her to confirm whether she was dead or not. Even if she was faking her death, Teresa should be able to survive with her strong defense. Okay. Teresa nodded and looked deeply at Gray before walking towards Blade Weasel. He had underestimated Teresa once again. He did not expect her to have such a powerful trump card. If he were to fight her to the death, he might be the one to lose. This made him even more fearful. Teresa was indeed not an ordinary person to be lured into exploring the ruins by his young mistress at such a high price and using a barbarian-level blood technique. She's dead. Teresa went forward and checked carefully. After confirming that there was no breathing or heartbeat, she told Gray and Sophia. Gray controlled the plants and removed the spikes. Sophia went forward, took out a blood bag, and hurriedly collected the blood. In terms of strength, Blade Weasel was definitely at the forefront of Berserker-level Blood Fiends. It was not an exaggeration to call it a special Blood Fiend. Unfortunately, it was facing 3 Berserkers, and the 3 of them were quite strong among the Berserkers. Sophia cultivated a special blood technique, and the magic weapon in her hand was extremely powerful. Teresa did not cultivate a special blood technique, but with the characteristics of her blood technique, it was only slightly weaker than a special blood technique. As for Gray, although he did not cultivate a special blood technique, his strength was even stronger than a special Blood Fiend after fusing with the characteristics of many Blood Fiends. From the moment Blade Weasel attacked Gray and the other 2, the outcome was already decided. Gray and the other 2 chose to take a detour to reduce the consumption of blood force, not because they were afraid of Blade Weasel. In fact, it was the blade weasel that died in the end. Of course, blade weasel's strength was certain. Gray and the other two joined forces, but there were still people who were injured. Among them, Teresa's injuries were not light. This battle record already showed blade weasel's strength. After handing a bottle of healing potion to Teresa, Sophia looked at Gray in disgust. Uncle Teresa's injuries are not light. Even if he drank the healing potion, he will only be able to recover tomorrow. Moreover, the three of us have consumed a lot of blood force. Let's rest here for a day. No problem. Gray nodded in agreement. Although he only had a scratch on his arm, he had consumed a lot of blood force. If he encountered another special blood fiend like Blade Weasel, it would definitely be difficult. Both of them tacitly did not ask what the other party had used. Gray did not ask Sophia what method Sophia used to suddenly increase her speed to a terrifying level. Was a blood fiend's ability or the effect of a magic weapon? Sophia also did not ask Gray what kind of magic weapon he had that could control plants was and what its limits were. Although both sides had cooperated twice, they obviously did not reach the level of complete trust. Both sides understood this point very well. The trees in the surrounding area were all cleared by their battle. They simply set up a tent on the spot. After resting for a day, Teresa's injuries were basically healed with the help of the healing potion. The three of them set off again. Along the way, they encountered several mad blood fiends. Although they were not as strong as Blade Weasel, they were still mad blood fiends. Gray and the other two spent a lot of energy and blood force on them. 2 days later, a huge ruin appeared in front of the three of them. Majestic, spectacular, magnificent. Although it had become a ruin, one could still feel the majesty of this ruin. The steeple was dozens of meters high. The huge pillar required several people to wrap their arms around it. The wall stood tall like a mountain. This relic was much larger than the two relics they had encountered before. The area it occupied was several times the size of the two ruins. The magnificence of the buildings was also a level higher. If the two imperial ruins they had encountered before were designed and built by top architects, then this ruin was designed and built by a master architect. The three of them walked into the castle through a broken part of the wall. Suddenly, the three of them could not help but raise their eyebrows and look forward. In front of them, in the center of the ruin, where the main building of the castle was supposed to be, the entire ground had collapsed, forming a pit with a diameter of several hundred meters. What happened? The ruin collapsed? Teresa frowned, her face filled with disappointment. In the entire ruin, the most likely place to have good things was naturally the main building of the castle. After all, that was where the person with the highest status in the castle lived. But now that place had actually collapsed. In this case, it was hard to say whether there would be any gains in the main building area. After all, there were only 3 of them, so it was impossible for them to excavate and clean up such a large ruin. Now that the main building area had collapsed, they could only try to search on the surface to see if they could find anything valuable. What a pity! Seeing the collapsed main building, Gray's voice was filled with regret. Seeing how big the ruin was, he thought that he would have a bountiful harvest and pay off his debt. He did not expect such a situation to occur. The basement of the castle was most likely under the main building. Now that the entire building had collapsed, the basement was most likely submerged. It was almost impossible to explore the basement. Don't you feel that the surroundings of the ruin are very strange? Right at this moment, Sophia's delicate brows slightly raised as she spoke. Strange? It is indeed a bit strange. When we were still some distance away from the ruin, we did not find any wild beasts or animals. Gray nodded and thought of the abnormality he had discovered earlier. With the infrared perception of the shadow snake, he could even sense animals hidden in the dense forest. But when they were close to the ruin, they did not find a single animal. The collapsed area does not seem to have collapsed naturally. Let's go take a look first before we start searching. Gray and Teresa naturally had no objections to Sophia's suggestion. Thus, the 3 of them walked toward the center of the castle and quickly arrived at the edge of the collapsed area. That is, the 3 of them looked at the collapsed area. Suddenly, their pupils shrank and they looked at the center of the collapsed area with shock. Chapter 223. The bones have actually completely turned into jade. The three of them were powerful, so their vision was naturally not bad. Even from a distance of 100 or 200 meters, they could still clearly see that this skeleton was different from ordinary skeletons. Teresa clicked her tongue, her face full of astonishment. What level of expert was this person when he was alive? His bones have actually turned into jade. As one's strength increased, the bones of a blood warrior's body would undergo a transformation, turning into an even stronger jade. This could be considered a type of evolution, an evolution to a higher level. And this skeleton, which was very likely from the era of the Empire, had actually completely turned into jade. In other words, the other party had completely completed this type of evolution. Although he was still in human form, to a certain extent, he was already in existence that was fundamentally different from humans. It was rumored that such an existence had completely merged the bloodline of the blood fiends into his body, and his bloodline had undergone a fundamental change. Originally, even the children of powerful blood warriors could at most inherit some of their father's cultivation talent. In terms of their bodies, they were no different from ordinary children. But after their bodies had completed the evolution, they were fundamentally different from ordinary humans. Their children could be born with a bloodline, and of a rather high level. Even if they had not yet been implanted with a bloodline, they could already cultivate the sequence of blood techniques that their father or mother had cultivated. There were even some who had yet to cultivate when they were born and already possessed powerful strength. The children of ordinary families were born without the strength to truss a chicken. However, the children of those who had completed their evolution were likely to have the strength to tear apart tigers and leopards when they were born, at least of the king level, Sophia said with a serious expression. Because of her family's rich collection of books, she had read too many books regarding the realm of blood warriors. She understood the jade-like bones more than Teresa did, and also understood the most basic condition for jade-like bones, which was that one's strength had to be at least that of a king-level warrior. The reason why a king-level warrior's lifespan was longer than an ordinary person's was because their bodies had completed the jade-like transformation. With the skeleton of such an expert around, it's not strange that the surroundings are so quiet. There aren't any animals around. Is it because of this skeleton? Gray looked at Sophia in confusion. The Fergus family was only an ordinary family of viscounts. Naturally, they did not know many secrets about cultivation. This was the first time that he had heard of the jade-like body, not to mention the fact that there were no animals around him. Yes, Sophia nodded and said, although this expert is already dead, his bones are constantly emitting a suppressive aura. When the blood fiends and animals feel this suppressive aura, they naturally don't dare to stay nearby. Is he emitting pressure? Gray had a suspicious look on his face. It was indeed very suspicious that there were no animals around. But if it was said that it was emitting pressure, he was skeptical because he did not feel it at all. He even had doubts about the pressure itself. Experts could emit pressure, and the pressure they emitted was enough to scare away enemies weaker than them, rendering them powerless to resist. He had read about this in a book, but he always felt that it was illusory. According to the book's description, pressure was neither a physical ability nor a blood fiend's ability. It was an external manifestation of the expert's will. What was a will? It was just a thought. How could it affect the external material world? He couldn't figure it out, and he was even more suspicious of it. Let's go closer. Sophia did not answer Gray's question. Instead, she took the lead and walked down the steep slope formed by the ruins of the building toward the skeleton below. Gray was puzzled, but he still followed. Teresa did the same. Soon, the three of them were only 100 meters away from the skeleton. Suddenly, Gray felt a strange sense of heaviness in his heart. It seemed to be physical, but it also seemed to be mental. He felt that his body, which was originally flexible and easy to control, was suddenly a little out of his control and became much heavier. At the same time, there was also a burst of panic. Suddenly, he became distraught. His mind was full of distracting thoughts, and his heart was uneasy. This is pressure? Grimm's expression turned serious as he looked at Sophia and asked, "Yes, this is pressure." Sophia nodded. "If we continue to get closer, the pressure will become stronger. In the end, your body will not be under your control." The three of them continued to move forward. The further they went, the heavier their bodies felt. When they were close to 30 meters away, the three of them felt as if their bodies were being pressed down by a mountain. Their bodies were so heavy that they could not even move their feet. The three of them retreated more than 10 meters before they felt a little more relaxed. Even so, their bodies were still heavy, and their minds were still oppressed and irritated. This is the pressure that the skeleton naturally emits. If this expert was alive, it would be many times stronger than now. Sophia looked at Gray and explained, "Although this pressure gets weaker the farther away, animals have extremely sharp senses. Even if the distance is quite far, they can still feel it. That's why there are no animals nearby. I didn't expect pressure to really exist, and it's actually so terrifying." Gray's eyes widened, and his heart was overwhelmed with shock. "Moreover, I, whose strength has reached the level of a berserker, can't even get close to a skeleton. Is this the gap between me and a king warrior or above?" Who was already a berserker, was actually so weak in front of king warrior or above. He couldn't even get close to the skeleton. One could imagine how big the gap between him and a king warrior was. A king warrior is already so strong. How strong would the person who could kill the skeleton in front of us be? Just now, when he was close, he clearly saw that only the ribs on the left chest area of the skeleton were broken. The whole area had collapsed, and the other parts of the skeleton were intact. It was as if someone had smashed the heart with a punch. To be able to kill a king warrior with a punch and leave such a deep pit with a diameter of hundreds of meters, how strong was the person who did it? "Don't get too close to the skeleton. Let's search this pit first." The three of them began to search the pit. After several hours, they found nothing. All the buildings had collapsed, and the difficulty of searching was too high. Even if they found some good things, they found that they had already been destroyed. The destructive power of the battle at that time was too strong. It was very difficult to find items that could be preserved in such a battle. As for the possible existence of a secret room, regardless of whether it had collapsed or not, it would be very difficult for the three of them to find it in a short time, unless they were willing to spend several months here. Moreover, they couldn't get close to the skeleton at all within a few dozen meters. After trying to dig for a while and not finding anything, they could only give up. Forget it. Let's go look elsewhere. In the end, the three of them left the pit and began to search the nearby well-preserved buildings. The first place they came to was a steeple-shaped building that was dozens of meters tall, close to the castle wall. This should be a place used as a sentry tower. The three of them went up floor by floor. When they reached the top, a skeleton appeared in front of them. The skeleton wasn't jade-like. It was just an ordinary skeleton. Beside the skeleton, there was a bow-type weapon. Judging from the metal used, it should be a magic weapon, but it had been destroyed long ago. The bowstring was broken, and the bow was full of rust. Obviously, after 1,000 years, if it wasn't preserved properly, even a magic weapon would be damaged and decayed. After leaving the steeple, they searched a few more places. Finally, a building that was slightly larger than the other places appeared in front of them. This wasn't a defensive building, but a residence. Walking in, Gray and the other two quickly found more than 10 skeletons. One of the skeletons had a tendency to turn jade-like. Some parts had already begun to turn jade-like. It has already started to turn jade-like. This person should have been a barbarian blood warrior when he was alive. Looking at the skeleton, Sophia judged. "There's a door here." After searching for a while, a rusty but locked door appeared in front of the three of them. "Ah!" Teresa let out a low growl and then abruptly kicked out with his leg. Bang! With a loud sound, the door and the surrounding rooms trembled, and dust fell. After the trembling, the door was still intact, but a lot of rust fell off. So sturdy. Gray's eyes first revealed a trace of surprise, and then he couldn't help but feel excited. Teresa's strength could be ranked in the upper echelons of the berserkers. With a kick, she actually couldn't kick open this rusty door. It seemed that the metal used for this door wasn't ordinary. And a place that used an unusual metal as a door must be a place that was rather important to the owner of this house. There might be some good things inside. Let's try to destroy the wall. Since the door couldn't be opened, then the wall would be broken. Thinking of this, Gray drew his sword and then suddenly slashed out. Chi! The material used for the wall should be a material that was as hard as metal. However, with Gray's current strength, even an extremely hard metal wall could be split open, not to mention a material that was only as hard as metal. With a slash, a huge slanted opening appeared. Chi! Gray's sword continuously slashed out, and two more slashes appeared on the wall. On the wall, a huge inverted triangle appeared. Rumble! With a gentle push of his hand, it immediately fell back, making a heavy sound and raising a lot of dust. After the dust dispersed, Gray and the other two immediately walked in through the gap. What entered their eyes was a room that was only 100 square meters. Chapter 2:24. The first thing the three of them looked at was the weapon rack. There were more than a dozen weapons on it. There were knives, swords, spears, axes, and a few rare weapons. Because they had already agreed to split the loot between the three of them did not fight over it. Gray walked over, took a sword, and unsheathed it, revealing a fiery red blade. A trace of blood energy was poured into the sword, and an orange flame appeared on the blade. This was obviously a magic weapon, and because it was well preserved, it was not damaged. The three of them checked one after another. There were a total of 13 weapons on the weapon rack, and they were all well-preserved magic weapons. However, they were all ordinary magic weapons that had only reached the level of dark iron. There were no weapons of higher levels. The three of them then opened the wooden boxes one after another. The first wooden box was also the largest one, and it was filled with gold coins. The golden light was very dazzling, but the value was not too high. At most, there were tens of thousands of gold coins, and they were from the era of the Empire, so their value was discounted. The second box contained a box of jewelry. There was no such thing as antiques in this world. Nobles preferred the practicality and value of an item, and not the value given by history. Therefore, the value of these jewelry could only be estimated according to the current market price of jewelry in the Purple Moon Kingdom. Gray estimated that if this box of jewelry was sold, it could be sold for 1 or 200,000. The third box was filled with many magic potions. Its value should have been extremely high, but unfortunately, after 1,000 years, these magic potions had dried up, and its value was 0. The fourth box was rather large, and it was filled with magic coins. There were about 50,000 of them. After opening all the boxes, Gray and the other two looked at the only thing left in the room. There were 4 metal jars. They were tall, round, and looked very similar to the jars containing the blood of the blood fiends that Gray had found in the ruins of the Jade Sea Forest. Looking at these 4 jars, the 3 of them were a little hesitant. After 1,000 years, the blood in these jars had probably rotted. If they opened it, they probably wouldn't find anything other than a foul stench. For a moment, the 3 of them hesitated, not knowing if they should open them or not. The words on the surface of this metal bottle can still be seen clearly. After sizing up the 4 metal bottles, Gray's gaze finally landed on the smallest one. It was only slightly bigger than a bowl. Although the label on its surface was quite blurry, it could still be seen clearly. "I sold beast blood." Following the words, Gray read them aloud and turned to look at Sophia. What rank is this blood fiend? He had to admit that, as someone who came from a great noble family, the depth of his knowledge was enough to throw Gray off by several notches. This is a desolate level special blood beast. It has the ability to freeze ice. Among the desolate level blood beasts, it can be ranked at the top. Sophia explained. The blood of a desolate level special blood beast, and an ice-type one at that. What a pity. Gray shook his head regretfully. This kind of blood was very suitable for him. If he swallowed it, the power of the wild wind blade would definitely increase dramatically. Unfortunately, after 1,000 years, the blood in the jar had probably rotted. Just as he was thinking this, he saw Sophia walk up to him. She pressed one hand on the metal bottle and the other on the lid of the metal bottle. Then, Blue lines flashed across the surface of the metal bottle. Sophia must have infused the blood energy into it. This bottle is a magic weapon. No, should I call a magic item? Gray was surprised. This was the first time he had seen a magic item of this shape. Crack! Right at this moment, Sophia actually started to twist the bottle cap. With a cautious sound, the bottle cap was loosened by her, and she opened it. Thinking of the stench he smelled last time, Gray subconsciously stepped back. However, after a while, until Sophia closed the lid again, there was still no stench. There was only a faint smell of blood. It doesn't stink. The blood hasn't rotted? Grim doubted. This bottle is a magic item specially used to preserve the blood of blood beasts. So the blood in this bottle hasn't rotted. Sophia explained. That's great. Gray's eyes suddenly lit up. The blood of a desolate level special blood beast that had not rotted and was of the ice element was very useful to him. If he consumed it and merged it with his wild wind blade, the blade would definitely have a terrifying icy energy. This effect could even last until he reached the desolate level. After all, this was the blood of a desolate level blood beast. The three of them checked the other 3 jars. After discovering that they were just ordinary metal jars, they did not open them again. It was the sour smell that had left a deep impression on them. After going through all the items in the room, because Gray's rune space bag was the largest, Gray packed everything together and the 3 of them left the room. After a few hours, the sky was getting dark. The 3 of them stopped their search. They had basically finished searching the entire ruins. After obtaining a considerable amount of loot from the room, they had obtained some more items. However, the value of those items could not be compared to the items in the room. The scattered magic weapons and the well-preserved barbarian-level blood spell book. The total value of these items was only about 100,000 gold coins. After setting up a tent in an open space in the ruins and placing everything on the ground, Gray and the other 2 began to divide the loot. A total of 21 magic weapons, all of which are of the dark iron level. The price of each weapon is 5,000 gold coins, so the total is 105,000 gold coins. A blood spell book that can be cultivated to the barbarian level by the Flaming Lion Echelon is 100,000 gold coins. About 50,000 magic coins, which is 5 million gold coins. A portion of Ice Soul Beast Blood is about 5,000 gold coins, so there are about 10 portions, which is 500,000 gold coins. All the items add up to about 6 million gold coins. If we divide it evenly, each person will have 2 million gold coins. You still owe me 1 million gold coins. Sophia looked at Gray and said, I'll owe it to you first. Also, I need a portion of Ice Soul Beast Blood. Gray smiled bitterly. Compared to before, the loot this time was not bad. In fact, it was a lot more. However, it was still far from the 3 million gold coins he owed. Although he still had more than 700,000 gold coins, he didn't bring them with him. Even if he did, he would still owe her. No problem. Then you owe me 1,050,000 gold coins, right? The corners of Sophia's mouth rose slightly as she said with a smile. That's right. Gray nodded. Somehow, he felt a little scared. He owed her so much. Based on her character, he was afraid that he would have a hard time in the future. Teresa's gaze towards Gray was filled with sympathy. Owing money to his young mistress, this fellow was destined to be plagued with misfortune in the future. The next day, the 3 of them started to go back the way they came. However, not long after they left the ruins. Thump, thump, thump. Suddenly, a horrible noise came from the depths of the forest. Trees collapsed in large swathes, and thousands of animals fled in a frenzy. They were running for their lives in panic. The 3 of them even saw a tiger knocked into a tree and fainted. The other animals stepped on its body. In just a moment, the tiger was trampled into a bloody mess and turned into a pile of mud. All the animals were running wildly, as if there was a horrible being chasing after them. Among these animals, there were ordinary wild beasts and blood fiends. Some of the blood fiends were even more than 5 meters long. If they were not mistaken, they should be blood fiends at the mad level. Beast tide. Oh no, it's a beast tide. Gray and the other 2's expressions changed drastically. A beast tide that was hard to come by actually appeared, and it happened while they were in the forest. Chapter 225. What exactly happened in the depths of the forest? Gray felt his scalp go numb at the sight of the dense horde of violent blood beasts. Let's run for our lives first. Teresa's expression was grave. Although the three of them were not weak, a large number of ants could still bite an elephant to death. Furthermore, there were thousands of wild beasts and blood fiends, not ants at all. Not only were there berserk blood fiends that were comparable to them, but there might also be stronger blood fiends. It's too late to escape. Let's turn back and rely on the pressure of the remains to resist the blood beasts. Sophia shook her head and said solemnly, "Indeed, there must be berserk blood fiends or even stronger blood fiends in the horde. With our speed, we won't be able to outrun them." Gray said solemnly, "Let's go back." The three of them looked at each other. Without any hesitation, they charged toward the thousands of blood beasts. Thump, thump, thump. Dozens of blood beasts appeared in front of Gray and the other two. Gray slashed out with his frost wind blade, creating a gap in the middle of the blood beasts. Before the gap closed, Gray and the other two charged through the gap. Boom! A berserk blood fiend was sent flying by the combined attack of Gray and the other two. Gray and the other two charged forward again. Dozens of blood fiends charged toward them. The three of them exerted all their means and charged through the gaps between the blood fiends. Several blood fiends panicked and launched their blood beast abilities at them. Gray blocked the attacks with his arms. Teresa's skin petrified, and Sophia's body was enveloped in blue light. She exploded with terrifying speed and dodged all the blood fiends. The three of them used their own means and went against the flow, rushing toward the remains not far away. After several dangerous encounters, they finally returned to the remains. The remains did not let them down. They had indeed resisted the blood beasts. When the blood beasts passed by the remains, they would obviously avoid the remains. The three of them were relieved. They climbed up a steeple in the remains and looked behind them. A shocking scene appeared before their eyes. At this moment, a dense beast tide was surging from behind. At a glance, there was no end in sight. Among them, one could occasionally see extremely large blood fiends. Some were over 7 meters tall, while others were over 7 meters long. They ran amok in a panic. Everything in front of them, be it wild beasts or blood fiends, was sent flying without exception. After falling, before he could get up, he was trampled by the other blood fiends and turned into meat paste. Barbarian-level blood fiend. It must be a barbarian-level blood fiend. Gray's expression was grave as he stared at the blood fiends. Fortunately, we made a prompt decision to return to the ruins. Otherwise, we would be in danger. Teresa heaved a sigh of relief. Competing with a barbaric-level blood fiend in terms of speed was, without a doubt, a suicidal move. It could be seen from the encounters of the animals and blood beasts that blocked the path of the barbaric-level blood beasts. Can the pressure of the ruins withstand these barbaric-level blood fiends? Gray looked at Sophia worriedly. "I think so." Sophia furrowed her brows, not daring to be too sure. If it was a king-level warrior who was emitting the pressure at this moment, he would naturally be able to disperse the blood fiends with just the pressure alone. However, at this moment, it was merely the skeleton of a powerful warrior. Even she could not guarantee that it would have that kind of deterrent effect. Under the nervous gaze of the three of them, the abnormally large blood fiends quickly approached. When they were close to the ruins, they became visibly uneasy. Then, they suddenly changed their direction and avoided the ruins. Fortunately, seeing this, the three of them heaved a sigh of relief. It was obvious that the pressure of the ruins was effective even against these barbaric-level blood fiends. However, the three of them still did not dare to relax. Their gazes were still fixed on the blood fiends, afraid that an unforeseen event would occur. "Miss, what do you think caused this beast tide?" Teresa furrowed her brows and asked Sophia. "I don't know, but it is highly likely that it has something to do with the king beast." Sophia shook her head. King beast. Hearing this name, Gray's expression instantly became serious. The king beast was a blood fiend whose strength was comparable to that of a king-level warrior. It was extremely powerful. The only fortunate thing was that this type of blood fiend usually stayed in the depths of the forest and would not leave the forest unless it was under special circumstances. Otherwise, it would be a devastating disaster for humans. At this moment, in the depths of the dark forest, a blood fiend with a body length of more than 10 meters was roaring angrily. Its appearance was similar to a lizard, and its body was covered with sapphire-like scales. It had a thick texture and did not lose its beauty. At this moment, there were hideous wounds on the surface of these scales. Dark red blood flowed out from the wounds on its body like a stream. Roar, roar. It roared angrily, and then terrifying lightning suddenly wrapped around its body and swept out like a vast ocean. Right in front of the lightning, a figure that was much smaller than this blood fiend with a body length of more than 10 meters appeared. It was a man holding a long saber. The man's hair was completely white, but his face did not look too old. There was a unique aura of vicissitudes on his face. In the face of this vast ocean of lightning, his expression was calm and his eyes were unperturbed. The long saber in his hand suddenly slashed out. Whoosh! A huge purple light appeared and met the lightning head-on. Whoosh! Under this purple light, the vast ocean of lightning suddenly split into two like a broken river. It avoided the white-haired man and hit behind him. Crackle, crackle. Two terrifying charred marks spread out. In the forest behind the white-haired man, two terrifying charred marks the size of several football fields appeared. All the trees were instantly char-black. Not only that, but there were also raging flames. Around the huge blood fiend and the white-haired man, there were many burning forests like this. Whoosh! The man broke the ocean of lightning with one slash and stepped out. Dong, dong, dong. Although he did not have wings, the man was running in the air. With every step he took, he exerted a great pressure on the air. Relying on the reaction force of this great pressure, he was able to temporarily run in the air. In less than a moment, the man had already approached the huge blood fiend and slashed at its neck. The huge blood fiend's eyes were filled with anger and fear. It instinctively dodged to the side. Whoosh! The huge blood fiend avoided its neck, but another huge wound appeared on its body. Dark red blood spilled out. The huge blood fiend was suddenly sent flying and smashed into the ground with a loud bang. The white-haired man took several steps in the air and suddenly caught up. He then slashed the neck of the huge blood fiend before it could stand up. Whoosh! Blood spurted out like a fountain. The huge blood fiend struggled frantically. The surrounding ground slowly sank with a loud bang. Finally, the huge blood fiend stopped struggling and collapsed weakly. The white-haired man quickly arrived in front of the huge blood fiend. Suddenly, a huge rune bag appeared in his hand. He began to collect the huge blood fiend's blood. After a full half an hour, the beast tide was still not over. Gray and the other two looked grave. At this time, there should be more than 50,000 beasts passing by. Even so, there was still no end to the beast tide. One could imagine the scale of this beast tide. Look, that's... Suddenly, Teresa's expression changed abruptly. She looked in a certain direction in horror. Following his gaze, no matter if it was Gray or Sophia, the dark expressions on their faces were similarly filled with fear. In the beast tide, a blood fiend with a body length of nearly 10 meters appeared. Its huge body made it stand out among the herd of beasts like a crane in a flock of chickens. The wild beasts and blood fiends moved aside to make way for it. Surprisingly, there was a vacuum around it. Oh no, the majesty of the ruins did not stop it. Chapter 226. Boom! The mountain-like wall collapsed with a loud crash. A blood fiend with a body length of nearly 10 meters charged into the ruins. Its entire body was covered with long black hair, making it look like a patch of black grass. Its forelegs were unusually thick, like 4 giant pillars that supported the sky. Every step it took left a deep depression in the ground. A desolate-level blood fiend. Gray was shocked. This was definitely a desolate-level blood fiend that was stronger than a barbarian-level blood fiend. On the minaret, Gray and the other two were carefully observing this desolate-level blood fiend. They did not even dare to breathe loudly for fear of attracting the attention of this desolate-level blood fiend and being attacked by it. If it was a barbarian-level blood fiend, the three of them might have a chance of survival if they used all their trump cards. As for a desolate-level blood fiend, it was impossible. The huge gap between the two levels was like an insurmountable chasm. This was not something that could be made up for with numbers. After all, when one's defense reached a certain level, attacks would be ineffective. No matter how many of them there were, it would be useless. Moreover, there were only 3 of them. It was a pitiful number. Boom, boom, boom. This desolate-level blood fiend rampaged through the ruins. Any building that blocked its path was easily smashed to pieces like tofu. The debris of the building was like a cannonball, flying everywhere in large chunks. The minaret that Gray and the rest were in happened to be nearby. Immediately, it was hit by many cannonballs. More than 10 holes appeared in the minaret, and it was on the verge of collapse. Fortunately, the thing that Gray and the rest were most worried about did not happen. The desolate-level blood fiend did not seem to have noticed them. Or perhaps, even if it had noticed them, it did not pay any attention to them and was only focused on escaping. After smashing a large number of buildings in the ruins, it emerged from the other side of the wall and disappeared into the distance. Go down quickly. The minaret is about to collapse. Seeing that the desolate-level blood fiend had left, Gray and the rest did not have time to heave a sigh of relief. They quickly ran down the minaret. In the earlier impact, the minaret had been hit by many boulders. Coupled with its 1,000-year history, it was already on the verge of collapse. Now it was starting to collapse. The moment the 3 of them ran out of the minaret began to fall apart. Huge boulders fell down, many of which were aimed at Gray and the rest. Bang, bang, bang. Gray and the other 2 quickly dodged, avoiding the falling boulders and running into the distance. Rumble. The steeple, on the other hand, completely collapsed with a rumble, kicking up a huge cloud of dust. Looking at the collapsed minaret, the 3 of them felt a lingering fear. Falling from a height of tens of meters, even for them, would not feel good. What should we do? The pressure of the skeleton doesn't seem to have any effect on the desolate-level blood fiends. Teresa's expression was grave and worried. Judging from a situation just now, the pressure of the skeleton should only be able to disperse the barbarian-level blood fiends. If the blood fiends were at the desolated level, even the pressure of the skeleton would not have much of a deterrent effect. Let's go near the skeleton. The closer we get to the skeleton, the stronger the pressure. Even a desolate-level blood fiend would not dare to get too close. Sophia said. The 3 of them immediately went to the deep pit and approached the skeleton. They only stopped when the pressure was so strong that they almost couldn't control their bodies. Boom, boom, boom. Not long after they entered the deep pit of the skeleton, more desolate-level blood fiends rushed into the ruins, smashing countless buildings before leaving. Then, more desolate-level blood fiends rushed into the ruins from time to time. Inside the ruins, large areas of buildings collapsed, splashing soil and rocks. Many of them smashed towards the 3 of them who were in the deep pit. Fortunately, although the 3 of them were not a match for these desolate-level blood fiends, they could still withstand the aftershocks. Boom! Here comes another one. This is the 15th one. Gray thought to himself as he smashed a rock flying towards him with a punch. However, in the next moment, his expression abruptly changed as he exclaimed, "Oh no!" A desolate-level blood fiend rushed into the deep pit. In front of them, a 9-meter-long bull-shaped blood fiend rushed into the deep pit with a rumbling sound. The 3 of them were extremely nervous. Fortunately, the closer they got to the skeleton, the stronger the pressure of the skeleton became. When they were 50 meters away from the skeleton, the bull-shaped blood fiend finally panicked and turned around without hesitation. After another half an hour, the rumbling sound gradually disappeared. Obviously, the blood fiend tide had passed. Gray and the other 2 heaved a sigh of relief. They walked out of the deep pit where the skeleton was and looked outside. Under the impact of the desolate-level blood fiend, the entire ruins had collapsed and turned into a pile of rubble. Fortunately, they had made a prompt decision to approach the skeleton and use the pressure of the skeleton to disperse the desolate-level blood fiends. Otherwise, they would have been in danger. Let's go. We have to leave the night forest as soon as possible. After glancing at the depths of the night forest, Gray and the other two no longer hesitated and rushed out of the night forest. Along the way, they saw corpses of wild beasts, including blood fiends. They even saw the corpse of a berserk-level blood fiend. It was a pity that too much time had passed and the blood had long dried up. Otherwise, they would have had a good harvest. While moving forward, a huge blood fiend corpse attracted their attention. It was a 7-meter-long, red-haired, ape-type blood fiend. The huge corpse lay there like a mountain. Is this a barbarian-level blood fiend? Gray was not sure. Judging from its size, it should be a barbarian-level blood fiend. However, if it was really a barbarian-level blood fiend, it should not have died in the beast tide. After all, as a barbarian-level blood fiend, it should have been able to protect itself in the beast tide. This is a barbarian-level blood fiend, Cercopithecus. Sophia confirmed after sizing it up. It is indeed a barbarian-level blood fiend. Gray looked serious. It was actually a barbarian-level blood fiend. It seemed that the beast tide was more dangerous than they had imagined. If they had not made a prompt decision to return to the ruins, the chances of them escaping would have been very small. Well, the barbarian-level blood fiend is dead. Fortunately, we made a prompt decision to return to the ruins. Teresa was also full of emotions. The three of them walked forward and observed the corpse of the barbarian-level blood fiend, Cercopithecus. The only injury on this Cercopithecus was its back, where its heart was. There was a huge hole there, as if it had been pierced by something huge and sharp. It is too unlucky. It must have encountered a barbarian-level blood fiend and was pierced by its horn. Gray deduced. Originally, the barbarian-level blood fiend would not deliberately attack a barbarian-level blood fiend, as they were all fleeing for their lives. However, this barbarian-level blood fiend must have been unlucky to have blocked the path of the barbarian-level blood fiend and was pierced through the heart by its horn. In fact, if the barbarian-level blood fiend had not been pierced through the heart and had only been stabbed in other non-vital areas, this Cercopithecus would not have died. After all, the barbarian-level blood fiend was fleeing for its life. As long as it did not continue to block its path, it would definitely not attack this Cercopithecus. Indeed, it is unlucky. Sophia nodded her head. Cercopithecus can control plants and give them an anesthetic effect. It is one of the strongest barbarian-level blood fiends. Its anesthetic effect is even somewhat effective on barbarian-level blood fiends. If it had been prepared, it would not have been killed so easily. The blood fiend's ability is anesthetic, and it is even effective on barbarian-level blood fiends. Gray's heart skipped a beat. He hurriedly took out a rune bag to collect the blood. The Jasper lizard's plant ability was to change the hardness of plants, making them as hard as steel. The Cercopithecus in front of them had the ability to give plants an anesthetic effect. If they could obtain and consume the blood of this blood fiend, they should be able to integrate it into the Jasper lizard's plant ability and greatly enhance it. Fortunately, a long time had passed, and the blood in this Cercopithecus had almost dried up. Chapter 227. After storing the carcasses of the barbaric-level blood beasts into their space bags, Gray and the other two continued their journey. 2 days later, the three of them left the night forest and arrived at the small town near the night forest. The small town was filled with discussions about the horde of blood beasts. In the end, the horde of blood beasts did not rush out of the night forest. They had already dispersed before they rushed out of the night forest. Even so, they still brought about an unimaginable disaster. After entering the night forest, this chapter is not authorized and cannot be read in green for the time being. If you support the author, please go to the official website to pay for reading. Chapter 228. Rumble, rumble. Trees were collapsing one after another. A 5-meter-long, burly blood fiend was wreaking havoc. It was like a bulldozer, rampaging through everything. All the trees and rocks it encountered along the way were smashed into smithereens by its impact. The skin of the gigantic blood fiend was bronze-colored, as if it was plated with a layer of bronze metal. It was a berserk blood fiend, a bronze-armored rhinoceros, known for its strong defense. As a berserk blood fiend, it was known for its strong defense. It had copper skin and iron bones, and its defense was one of the best among all berserk blood fiends. Its defense was not inferior to that of a barbarian blood fiend. Although its strength was not as exaggerated as its defense, it was still at the upper level of a berserk blood fiend. Its defense was comparable to that of a barbarian blood fiend, and its strength was at the upper level of a berserk blood fiend. It was extremely powerful, and a normal berserk blood fiend was no match for it. Even a special blood fiend would find it extremely difficult to kill it. Roar! The bronze-armored rhinoceros was wreaking havoc, smashing everything in its path. At this moment, there were 4 people facing it, and the situation was extremely dangerous. One of them was a middle-aged man with an ordinary face. He was Count Ford, a berserk warrior. He held a long spear in his hand, on which a golden-red flame was entwined. This was the ability of his blood fiend, a type of flame that could be attached to a weapon and cause scorching heat to the enemy. Whoosh! Faced with the bronze-armored rhinoceros, he dodged sideways. Then, the long spear entwined with flame stabbed out like a poisonous snake. Whoosh! 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 A black burn mark appeared on the body of the bronze-armored rhinoceros. However, it was not deep and was only a shallow wound for the huge body of the rhinoceros. As for the other 3, they were all berserk warriors. One of them held a sword, while the other held a saber. Their attacks landed on the body of the rhinoceros, but they could not even break its skin. Instead, they were pushed back by the recoil and were almost hit by the rhinoceros, which turned around. Fortunately, Count Ford restrained the rhinoceros in time, allowing the 3 of them to narrowly escape. Among the 3, one of them was a handsome middle-aged man with blonde hair. It was Viscount Fergus. Around the 4 of them, more than 30 people were looking at them anxiously. Among them, Bernal was among them. Father Bernal, after rushing to the vicinity, Gray did not go out. Instead, he hid a little further away to observe the situation. However, after observing the situation, his expression suddenly changed. At this moment, Viscount Fergus and Bernal were in a rather sorry state, as they were being chased by the copper-armored rhinoceros. We actually encountered a copper-armored rhino. Gray's face darkened slightly. Given the strength of Earl Ford's berserk warriors and Viscount Fergus's trio's ferocious blood warriors, dealing with ordinary berserk blood fiends wasn't too difficult. Unfortunately, the bronze price rhinoceros was not an ordinary blood fiend. Its powerful defense made it a rare opponent among the berserk gray blood fiends. Even special blood fiends could only defeat it at most, and rarely could they kill it. Viscount Fergus and the other 2's attacks were completely ineffective against it. Only Earl Ford's attack could hurt it, but it was only a light injury. If this continued, Viscount Fergus and Bernal would be in danger. Looks like I have to make a move. With a resolute expression, Gray immediately prepared to rush out and attack the copper-armored rhinoceros. If he didn't make a move, Earl Ford was probably the only one present who had the confidence to escape safely. The others, even Viscount Fergus with the strength of a ferocious blood warrior, didn't have much confidence in escaping safely, let alone Bernal, who was currently only a middle-level berserk warrior. However, in this way, the news that he was already a berserk warrior would spread. Originally, he and Viscount Fergus had planned to reveal it after a period of time. After all, the strength of a ferocious blood warrior had only been known for a short period of time. Moreover, keeping the trump card of being a berserk warrior might have an unexpected effect at a critical moment. However, he couldn't care so much now. He couldn't watch Viscount Fergus and Bernal fall into danger. No, maybe, just as he stepped out, Gray stopped in his tracks. Instead, he took out his rune space bag and took out the corpse of Cercopithecus. Let's give it a try. Looking at the corpse of Cercopithecus, Gray's eyes flashed with a trace of sharpness. He put the corpse of Cercopithecus into the rune space bag for 2 reasons. On the one hand, it was for the fur on the corpse. After all, it was the fur of a barbarian-level blood fiend. On the other hand, Gray also had the intention of trying to control a barbarian-level blood fiend with his ability to control corpses. Originally, he had planned to try again when he returned to the Fergus family. Now that Viscount Fergus and Bernal were in danger, he couldn't help but have the idea of trying to control it. If he could control it, he could totally control this barbarian-level blood fiend, Cercopithecus, to deal with the copper-armored rhinoceros and save Viscount Fergus and the rest without letting anyone know. Gray stuffed a ball of meat directly into the mouth of the Cercopithecus, while Gray's eyes stared unblinkingly in the direction of the battle between Viscount Fergus and the rest and the copper-armored rhinoceros. Once the situation went wrong, he couldn't care less and had to take action personally. Huff! Viscount Fergus's face was grave as he circled to the side of the copper-armored rhinoceros. With a low shout, a green wind blade suddenly slashed out toward the abdomen of the copper-armored rhinoceros. Ding! A sound similar to that of metal colliding rang out, and sparks sputtered. A shallow wound appeared on the copper-armored rhinoceros's body where the wind blade struck, and traces of blood seeped out. Seeing this scene, Viscount Fergus's face sank to the bottom of the valley. Compared to the copper-armored rhinoceros's huge body, the shallow wound was only at the level of a scratch. It couldn't even be considered a minor injury. Even if he used his blood fiend ability, he could only cause such an injury. One could imagine how strong the defense of the copper-armored rhinoceros was. He couldn't help but look at Count Ford. Although the other party's attack could cause injuries to the copper-armored rhinoceros, it was only a minor injury. If he wanted to rely on such an injury to kill the copper-armored rhinoceros, he might not be able to kill it even if he spent a few hours. Moreover, a battle like Count Ford's required the consumption of blood power. Although the consumption wasn't much, it couldn't last for a few hours. He didn't know if the other party had any other tricks up his sleeve. Otherwise, many of the people present today would be left behind. You guys help me stop it. Count Ford's face was gloomy. If Viscount Fergus could think of it, he could naturally think of it as well. With a loud shout, he activated his blood fiend ability with all his might. The golden red flames that were entwined around the tip of his spear suddenly grew by a notch. The blazing golden red flames circled around the tip of his spear, turning into a huge cluster of flames. The scorching heat spread, and the air was filled with a dry heat. Roar! As if sensing danger, the copper-armored rhinoceros turned around and glanced at Count Ford with its bell-sized eyes. At this moment, Count Ford moved. Whoosh! The air violently expanded and vibrated due to the high temperature. The golden red flames entwined around the fiery red spear, and with a scorching heat, it pierced towards the heart of the copper-armored rhinoceros. The copper-armored rhinoceros immediately prepared to turn around and dodge. At this moment, Viscount Fergus and the other two desperately intercepted it. The three of their weapons landed on the copper-armored rhinoceros's body, blocking it. Even so, they only managed to block the copper-armored rhinoceros for a moment before they were sent flying by the raging copper-armored rhinoceros. After being sent flying, they crashed into many trees and broke them. All of them bent over and couldn't get up immediately. Obviously, the three of them were injured. Whoosh! Although Viscount Fergus and the other two only managed to block the copper-armored rhinoceros for a moment, it was enough. At this moment, the spear entwined with golden red flames had already pierced the copper-armored rhinoceros's heart. Whoosh! The golden red flames that had grown by a notch were obviously hotter than before. It pierced the copper-armored rhinoceros's body with greater ease than before. Accompanied by a burnt smell, the tip of the spear continued to penetrate almost 30 to 40 centimeters before it finally stopped. Not good. After piercing 30 to 40 centimeters, Count Ford's expression changed abruptly. If it was a human that was pierced so deeply through the heart, it would definitely die. However, the one in front of him was not a human, but an extremely burly blood fiend with a body length of 5 meters. Roar! The copper-armored rhinoceros was indeed not killed, but it was extremely painful. It roared crazily, and then its body suddenly spun. Bang! Count Ford, who was holding the spear, was thrown out by the spinning. Kacha, kacha, kacha. One tree after another was smashed by Count Ford, who was sent flying. After smashing more than 10 trees in a row, Count Ford was sent flying for tens of meters before he finally stopped and fell to the ground. Even though he was a berserker, he couldn't get up immediately. Thump, thump, thump. At this moment, the copper-armored rhinoceros's eyes were red. It stomped on the ground and charged toward Count Ford. Count Ford. Nothing must happen to Count Ford. Otherwise, there was no hope of victory. Viscount Fergus and the other two clenched their teeth and tried to stop the copper-armored rhinoceros, but they were easily sent flying. After being sent flying, they couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. In an instant, the main force attacking the copper-armored rhinoceros, one berserker and 3 ferocious blood warriors, all lost their ability to fight. Count Ford, Viscount Fergus, Father. The expressions of Bernal and the others changed abruptly, and their hearts sank to the bottom of the valley. They originally thought that with 1 berserker and 3 ferocious blood warriors in the team, they could even kill a berserker blood fiend. Even if they couldn't, they would still be safe. They didn't expect to encounter such a terrifying berserker blood fiend. 1 berserker and 3 ferocious blood warriors were no match for it. Rumble. At this moment, a rumbling sound suddenly rang out. Bernal and the others looked over and immediately saw a horrifying scene. A 7-meter-long ape-type blood fiend suddenly appeared in front of the copper-armored rhinoceros. Then, it suddenly raised an extremely thick fist that was like a millstone and smashed it toward the copper-armored rhinoceros. Rumble. The originally unstoppable copper-armored rhinoceros was actually sent flying like a child in front of an adult. It was suddenly sent flying. Chapter 229. What? The blood fiend that even Earl Ford and the other 3 couldn't handle was sent flying by this blood fiend? What kind of blood fiend is this? Could it be? Looking at the 7-meter-tall Cercopithecus, everyone was shocked and terrified. They were shocked that the extremely powerful bronze-armored rhinoceros was sent flying so easily, as if it was a child being trampled on by an adult. They were terrified that they couldn't even handle the bronze-armored rhinoceros, and now they had encountered a blood fiend that was even more powerful than the bronze-armored rhinoceros. The situation was so terrible that it made them despair. Everyone felt a chill run down their spines, as if a basin of cold water had been poured over them. Some of them couldn't help but tremble. They didn't think that this new giant ape-type blood fiend was here to help them. Blood fiend gang? That was impossible. Unless it was a blood fiend that had been reared by humans since childhood, the first thing a blood fiend would think of when encountering a human would be to attack, not to get along with them. As for why it looked like it was saving them now, it was only because the bronze-armored rhinoceros was its primary prey. After the bronze-armored rhinoceros was killed, it would be their turn next. Quick, help Viscount Fergus and the rest up. We have to retreat quickly. At this moment, Earl Ford finally stood up, holding his back. His back was burning with pain. He had been injured in the collision just now. Fortunately, it wasn't serious. He had seen the bronze-armored rhinoceros being blocked by the ape-type blood fiend, and the shock he felt was no less than anyone else present. However, he was, after all, powerful and had been in a high position for a long time. His courage and insight were incomparable to ordinary people. Under such circumstances, he immediately realized that this was the best time to escape. If the ape-type blood fiend killed the bronze-armored rhinoceros and turned to attack them, it would be too late for them to escape. Yes, let's escape while it's fighting with the bronze-armored rhinoceros. Yes, quickly escape, run. The crowd finally reacted and hurriedly helped Viscount Fergus and the rest up, regretting that they didn't grow 4 legs and run in the opposite direction. Their injuries shouldn't be too serious. Using his shadow ability, Gray hid in the shadow of a tree and watched as Bernal helped Viscount Fergus leave. In the battle just now, he clearly saw that Viscount Fergus was only sent flying by the rebounding force of the weapon. He wasn't hit directly by the copper-armored rhino. Although he was slightly injured, his safety shouldn't be a problem. After the group of people had left and disappeared from his sight, he looked in the direction of the battle between the forest ape and the iron rhinoceros. Boom, boom, boom. Large tracts of forest collapsed. Mountain rocks shattered, and within a radius of 100 meters, there were traces of a terrifying battle. This was a one-sided devastation. The iron rhinoceros that had been rampaging was now being ravaged by the forest apes. The bronze armor rhinoceros was like a huge volleyball being hit by the forest ape. Although it possessed a defense that was not weaker than that of a barbaric-level blood fiend, its defense could be said to be extremely powerful. Within the same realm, there were very few blood fiends that could kill it. Even for someone as powerful as Gray, although he had absolute confidence in defeating the other party, he only had a 50 to 60% chance of killing the other party. It was just that the layer of copper skin and iron bones on his body was too strong. As a matter of fact, the copper rhinoceros was a berserk blood fiend of the iron rhinoceros sequence. Just like the iron rhinoceros, it had a defense that few blood fiends of the same level could match. Back when Gray was still a ferocious blood warrior, he had encountered an iron rhinoceros in the Redleaf Forest. At that time, Gray had used all of his means to deal with the other party, but he was still unable to kill him. With no other choice, Gray could only make the numerous blood fiends swarm forward and hold it down, then violently stab the position of its heart before finally killing it. In comparison, it wasn't difficult to imagine how difficult it was to kill the copper-armored rhinoceros. Unfortunately, the bronze-armored rhinoceros did not encounter a berserk-level blood fiend. Instead, it encountered a barbaric-level blood fiend. Although the copper-armored rhinoceros couldn't use its blood fiend abilities, it was still a barbaric-level blood fiend. Its strength, speed, and defense were all at the same level. On the other hand, the copper-armored rhinoceros was only at the level of a barbaric-level physical body. In comparison, the Cercopithecus could easily defeat the copper-armored rhinoceros. I didn't expect to be able to control it. Looking at the Cercopithecus, which was displaying its invincible might and ravaging the copper-armored rhinoceros, Gray's eyes revealed a trace of surprise and joy. The reason why he had left the corpse of the Cercopithecus behind was that he wanted to try his luck. He didn't expect to actually be able to control the Cercopithecus. Although the copper-armored rhinoceros couldn't use its blood fiend abilities and only had the physical strength of a barbaric-level blood fiend, it could only be considered half a barbaric-level blood fiend. Even so, it was already extremely powerful. Among the berserk-level blood fiends, it was absolutely unrivaled. Even special blood fiends were no match for it. According to Gray's estimation, even he himself wouldn't be a match for it for the time being. However, this should be the true limit of its control. Previously, when he controlled the Cercopithecus, Gray felt that his connection with the other four blood fiends had been completely severed. Obviously, in order to control this Cercopithecus, the other four blood fiends had been controlled by someone else. Therefore, Gray reckoned that the berserk level was the true limit of its ability to control corpses. In the future, it would be impossible to increase the number of berserk-level blood fiends. Even so, it's already extremely powerful. In terms of combat power, it's definitely much more powerful than the previous four blood fiends. If the Cercopithecus in front of him were to fight with the previous four blood fiends, Gray was sure that the Cercopithecus would emerge victorious. If they could use their blood fiend's abilities, the four blood fiends might have a chance of winning. However, since they couldn't use their blood fiend's abilities and relied solely on their physical strength, the damage they could cause to a barbaric-level blood fiend like the Cercopithecus was extremely limited. Unless it was like Gray's last time, where a total of 20 murderous-level blood fiends besieged a single berserk-level blood fiend and beat it to death with absolute numbers. The ability to control corpses is really powerful. Unfortunately, after encountering the corpse ape, I haven't even encountered a corpse ape, let alone a higher-level blood fiend. At the thought of this, Gray felt extremely regretful. The ability to control corpses could be said to be extremely powerful, but could also be said to be extremely weak. If there were no blood fiends under control, this ability would naturally be useless. However, if there were blood fiends under control, and the blood fiends under control were at their strongest level, Just like now, with the ability to control a murderous level blood fiend, one could imagine how powerful this ability was. Boom! While Gray was thinking about this, the battle between the Cercopithecus and the bronze-armored rhinoceros not far away ended when the Cercopithecus punched the bronze-armored rhinoceros in the chest. The bronze-armored rhinoceros's heart was dented, and its ribs were broken. The rhinoceros's heart was pierced, and it died. Gray hurriedly went forward to collect the blood. The bronze-armored rhinoceros's strong defense made him want to consume its blood to strengthen his defense. Of course, this was only a temporary consideration and had not been finalized yet. Everything depended on the blood resources in his hands. After thinking about it, he also collected the bronze-armored rhinoceros's corpse. Although the Cercopithecus was powerful, its body was too large, and it was not suitable to be placed on the second floor to guard Fergus Castle. Moreover, sometimes numbers were also an advantage. Therefore, Gray planned to continue controlling the 4 Berserk-level blood fiends, but he was prepared to replace the crocodile-type blood fiend with the bronze-armored rhinoceros. Of course, he would not give up on the Cercopithecus. He would place the Cercopithecus in the rune space bag, and, at the critical moment, he would be able to convert it into combat strength. Let's treat its injuries first. Gray looked at the Cercopithecus's back, where a huge bloody hole was clearly visible. Previously, he had been in too much of a hurry and did not have time to heal the Cercopithecus's injuries. Whoosh! Gray activated his Blood Fiend ability, and within a 100-meter radius, a faint green mist floated out of the plants. The mist quickly gathered and enveloped the Cercopithecus's huge body. Soon, the terrifying and hideous hole on the Cercopithecus's back completely disappeared, and it returned to its original state. Gray put the Cercopithecus back into the rune space bag and walked in the direction where Viscount Fergus and the rest had left. He was still a little worried about their safety. More than 10 miles away, Viscount Fergus and the rest, who were fleeing in fear, stopped after confirming that nothing was chasing them. They all heaved a long sigh of relief. This time, it was really not an ordinary danger. If not for the appearance of the ape-type blood fiend at the critical moment, more than half of the people present would have died. Father, was the blood fiend just now a barbarian-level blood fiend? Bernal's face was still filled with shock as he asked Viscount Fergus. It must be a barbarian-level blood fiend. Viscount Fergus's face was slightly pale due to his injuries. When he heard Bernal's question, he nodded solemnly. With such a huge body and powerful strength, he could not think of anything else other than a barbarian-level blood fiend. It's a barbarian-level blood fiend, Cercopithecus. Count Ford replied with a solemn expression. I did not expect to encounter such a powerful mad-level blood fiend at this depth. Even a barbarian-level blood fiend has appeared. If it had been a bronze-armored rhinoceros, he was confident that he could escape. However, if it had been a barbarian-level blood fiend Cercopithecus that had appeared at the end, he was afraid that he would not even have the chance to escape if he had been targeted. Earl Ford, it was all due to luck that we were able to escape today. It is obvious that the level of danger in the Night Forest is beyond our capabilities. We must retreat to the periphery and inform the Sidney family of the current situation, a man with a mustache said. A man with a mustache said. He was Arnold Goldsmith, a Viscount of the Ford family. Indeed, we may be able to escape this time, but we may not be able to escape the next time. Another man spoke with lingering fear. He was Viscount Francis Richard of the Ford family. Without much hesitation, the group of people retreated to the periphery of the Night Forest in unison. Chapter 230. Not far from where Viscount Fergus and the rest were, Gray, who had killed the bronze-armored rhinoceros, chased after Fergus and the rest. Originally, he had planned to secretly protect Fergus and the rest for a period of time and leave after Viscount Fergus's injuries had healed. However, when he saw Viscount Fergus and the rest heading straight for the outskirts of the Night Forest, he stopped. Although he was too far away and did not hear Viscount Fergus's conversation, he could roughly guess from their actions that Viscount Fergus and the rest felt that it was too dangerous to go deeper and decided to head to the outskirts. Going to the outskirts would naturally reduce the danger. Furthermore, Count Ford was a berserker, so there should be no problem with his safety. Since that was the case, he naturally did not need to follow and protect them. He went straight in the opposite direction. A few days later, deep in the night forest, roar, a 4-meter-long blood fiend covered in purple scales roared. It had a streamlined appearance and slender limbs. When it ran, it was as fast as lightning. Crackle. At this moment, several huge bolts of lightning were attracted and gathered in the surroundings, making it look extremely intimidating. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. More than a dozen thick green vines suddenly pierced towards it like spears. Crackle. At this moment, the lightning exploded. A bolt of lightning suddenly struck out and met the dozen or so spear-like vines. Then, the vines were charred black and smashed into pieces. They were completely broken. It also roared and let out an angry roar. However, the attack did not stop because of this. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. More vines turned into spears and attacked. It attacked with lightning and quickly ran to dodge, wanting to break out of the vine's encirclement. Poof! Unfortunately, no matter where it escaped, there were dense vines attacking it. From time to time, vines would attack its body, leaving deep penetrating wounds on its body. Although it would immediately control the lightning to explode it, the injuries on its body were increasing and becoming more and more serious. Finally, at some point, the injuries were enough to affect its mobility. Poof, poof, poof. A large number of spears pierced through the air, from front, back, left, right, and even from above. He was immediately pierced by the numerous spears. His body was like a hedgehog, covered in spikes. In the end, he could only unwillingly collapse to the ground and die completely. The 15th. Gray walked out of the messy forest and arrived in front of the dead blood fiend. He quickly collected its blood. This was the 15th blood fiend he had killed in the past few days. With his plant abilities, he was like a fish in water in the forest. In addition, as a special blood fiend, the jade lizard's plant abilities were extremely powerful. As a result, there were very few mad-level blood fiends that were a match for it. Every time it encountered a mad-level blood fiend, it would hunt them down without exception. Gray collected the blood, cut off the scales, and stored them in his rune space bag before he left. Although the value of the scales of the berserk blood fiends was not as high as its blood, it could still be sold for 10,000 gold coins. Now that he was heavily in debt, he naturally wouldn't miss this opportunity. Rustle. Not long after Gray left, a strange dragging sound was heard and a huge creature appeared. It was a snake-type blood fiend with a body of more than 20 meters long and an extremely thick body. The upper half of its body was raised high, and it was as tall as a 2-story building. The most unique thing about it was that it actually had 3 heads. The 3 heads were of different colors, red, green, and yellow respectively. The snake's pistol swallowed and spat as it discovered the corpse of the berserk blood fiend that Gray had thrown away. One of the snake's heads quickly opened its mouth, which was large enough to swallow a car. The snake's body wriggled and slowly swallowed the 4-meter-long corpse of the blood fiend. After that, it seemed to be unsatisfied and moved in another direction. That direction was the same direction that Gray had left. Rustle. As a berserk warrior, Gray's eyes and ears were naturally extremely sharp. He quickly discovered the rapidly approaching snake. What's coming? Sensing that something was coming from behind, Gray used his shadow ability and hid in the shadow of a tree. He looked in the direction of the movement. Soon, he saw the approaching snake. When he saw the 3-headed snake that was as tall as a 2-story building, his expression suddenly changed, and he quietly retreated to the side. How can this be? It's a 3-headed snake. The 3-headed snake was a beast with 3 heads in total. The 3 heads were of different colors. According to the description in the book, each of its heads could perform one type of blood fiend ability. With 3 heads, it could perform 3 types of blood fiend ability. It was rumored that the bloodline of this snake originated from the mythical beast Hydra. It was a beast with 10 heads, and each head could perform one type of blood fiend ability. It could control 10 types of blood fiend abilities: earth, fire, wind, thunder, ice, shadow, water, poison, wood, and metal. A beast, and a snake-type beast. Glenn's expression turned grave as he retreated. Savage Beast had extremely strong five senses. Even if Gray was hiding in the shadows, he was not confident that he would not be discovered. When he saw that his opponent was a snake-type beast, Gray immediately abandoned the idea of hiding in the shadows. Snake-type blood fiends had infrared sensing abilities. Even if he were to hide in the shadows, he would not be able to cut off the infrared radiation. He would be easily discovered by the snake-type blood fiend. Therefore, he did not hesitate to retreat quietly, even if he would be easily discovered by the snake-type blood fiend. If he were to hide in the shadows, he would definitely be discovered. If he were to retreat quietly, there is a possibility that he would be discovered, but there is also a possibility that he would not be discovered. Given the choice, Gray naturally chose the latter without hesitation. Now, he could only take a gamble and hope that he would not be discovered. Russell, just as Gray was thinking about this, suddenly, the trees in the direction of the snake-type blood fiend shook violently. There was a huge movement approaching. Then he saw the three heads of the snake appear. They were flicking their tongues and slithering rapidly toward him. "Oh no, I have been discovered." Gray's expression changed drastically. There was no doubt that this barbaric-level blood fiend had discovered him. Being targeted by a barbaric-level blood fiend, Gray felt his entire body turn cold. His back was covered in cold sweat. He forced himself to calm down. As he retreated rapidly, he took out his rune space bag and released Cercopithecus. With his current strength, he was definitely not a match for a barbaric-level blood fiend. He did not even have much confidence in escaping. If he wanted to turn the situation around, he could only rely on Cercopithecus. Thump, thump, thump. The ground shook violently. Under Gray's command, the 7-meter-tall Cercopithecus charged toward the three-headed snake. His footsteps were huge. Every step he took covered a distance of more than 10 meters. On the ground, huge and clear footprints appeared one after another, emitting a terrifying deterrent force. Hiss, hiss! Following the appearance of Cercopithecus, the three-headed snake stopped chasing after Gray. Obviously, it felt threatened by Cercopithecus. After all, Cercopithecus was too huge and too intimidating. In the dense forest, two gigantic creatures were confronting each other with a distance of more than 30 meters. The atmosphere was extremely oppressive. One of them was 7 meters tall and had a thick and violent appearance. Its two palms were like two huge millstones. Its huge body was extremely burly and carried an unimaginable power. The other one was covered in fine scales. Its upper body was as tall as a 2-story building. Its three heads were flicking their tongues. It looked ferocious and terrifying. I wonder if I can scare it off? Taking advantage of the confrontation between Cercopithecus and the three-headed snake, Gray hid in the distant forest. He was nervous as he looked at the two gigantic creatures confronting each other. If he was controlling the real Cercopithecus, he would not be afraid of the three-headed snake. However, the Cercopithecus he was controlling now was only a fake with an empty appearance. Although it had the body of a Cercopithecus and the body of a Cercopithecus, it lacked the blood beast abilities of a Cercopithecus. In terms of combat power, it was definitely inferior to a real Cercopithecus. Now, he could only hope that the three-headed snake would be frightened by the huge appearance of the Cercopithecus and retreat on its own accord. However, his hopes were dashed in the next moment. Rustle, rustle. The sound of the snake slithering could be heard. Suddenly, the three-headed snake shot forward and quickly approached the Cercopithecus. Then, it attacked the Cercopithecus with its gigantic scaly tail. This was an extremely terrifying attack. Large swathes of trees were broken by this terrifying attack. The sky was filled with fallen leaves and branches that were swept up by the snake's tail. Carrying the fallen leaves and branches, the snake's tail was so huge that it could not be hugged by a person. Compared to the snake's length, the snake's tail was too thick to wrap around. It lashed out like a gigantic whip. Whoosh! Cercopithecus punched out with its millstone-sized fist. With a violent momentum, it smashed into the snake's tail. Boom! A terrifying explosion occurred when the three-headed snake's tail and Cercopithecus's fist collided. The terrifying movement spread in all directions. A violent hurricane blew the fallen leaves on the ground into the sky. Even the soil was swept up. The snake's tail and fist collided and separated upon contact. Both of them retreated, causing a violent gust of wind to wreak havoc. Where the three-headed snake was hit by the fist, its scales fell off. Its flesh was badly mutilated, and dark red blood stains could be seen. The skin on Cercopithecus's fist, which was originally unscathed, was now broken. In this first collision, the three-headed snake did not have the upper hand over Cercopithecus. However, Gray's heart was not at ease because of this. The three-headed snake was a blood fiend that possessed 3 types of blood fiend abilities. The previous exchange was merely a test. What came next was the real test. Whoosh! Just as Gray was thinking about this, one of the red heads of the three-headed snake suddenly moved. The snake head opened its mouth and faced Cercopithecus. Then, in the next moment, a gigantic orange-yellow flame with a diameter of 1 meter suddenly appeared. The raging flame carried an unimaginably high temperature. It was as if the sun had fallen from the sky. It whistled and slammed into Cercopithecus. Along the way, the trees were reduced to ashes. The rocks and soil melted and softened. It was as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. This was the destructive power of a barbaric-level blood fiend. Chapter 231. Boom! A terrifying explosion occurred. Flames wreaked havoc. Heat waves engulfed the area. Dirt and rocks flew everywhere. A terrifying shockwave with fire snakes spread out in all directions, like a powerful bomb exploding. Everything along the way was pulverized. A huge crater appeared where Cercopithecus had been. The soil around the crater had melted. Cercopithecus appeared not far away, looking somewhat disheveled. Most of its hair had been charred by the fire. Cercopithecus had jumped out and dodged to the side just before the fireball had struck. Even so, it was unavoidably affected by the aftermath of the explosion. Its hair had been completely incinerated, and many parts of its body had been scorched. But this was not the end. The three-headed serpent raised its earthy yellow head. Then, a large amount of soil around it floated into the air. It solidified and turned into conical rocks that were harder than steel. They covered the sky and covered the earth as they attacked Cercopithecus. Poof! 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 Cercopithecus dodged quickly. Deep craters appeared on the ground one after another. Dirt and rocks flew everywhere. It was as if the conical rocks that had attacked it were artillery shells rather than conical rocks. Naturally, it was not easy to dodge such a large-scale and concentrated attack. Although Cercopithecus had dodged many of the attacks, it was still unavoidable that its body would be hit by the conical rocks. Boom! Boom! Every conical rock that landed on Cercopithecus left a bloody wound on Cercopithecus' body. After a while, when the conical rocks had completely disappeared, Cercopithecus' body was covered with bloody wounds. Cercopithecus still did not have a chance to catch its breath. More blood fiends attacked. Swish! The cyan head of the three-headed snake opened its mouth. Then, an enormous wind blade abruptly shot out. It suddenly slashed towards Cercopithecus at an unimaginable speed. The distance was too close, and the speed of the wind blade was too fast. Cercopithecus did not even have time to dodge before it was hit. Poof! Patter, patter! The Cercopithecus flew backward violently with the sound of flesh being cut open. Trees were constantly smashed by it as it flew backward. A huge and deep wound appeared on its abdomen. Fortunately, its body was extremely huge. If a human had such a huge wound on its body, it would definitely have been split in half. As expected, I'm no match for him. Seeing this scene, Gray felt a chill in his heart. Although he had already guessed that Cercopithecus was no match for Cercopithecus, there was still a glimmer of hope in his heart. He hoped that Cercopithecus had the strength to contend with Cercopithecus. Unfortunately, such an accident did not happen. Cercopithecus was completely at a disadvantage. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before Cercopithecus was chopped into minced meat. What should we do? Or Now, there were two paths in front of him. The first was to turn around and escape. While Cercopithecus was entangled with Cercopithecus, he would try to escape as far as possible. However, this method could not guarantee that he would be able to escape. If Cercopithecus was caught by Cercopithecus, he would definitely die. The second was to join the battle between the two sides and assist Cercopithecus. They would work together to defeat or scare off Cercopithecus. This method was also not safe. Even if he joined forces, he still did not have the confidence to defeat Cercopithecus. If he was still no match for Cercopithecus, then he would definitely die. Escape or fight to the death. In an instant, he was caught in a difficult choice. Fight. Finally, his eyes became resolute as he made his choice. Escaping depended on luck. Fighting to the death depended on strength. In the end, he chose to rely on his own strength. He hoped that with his help, Cercopithecus could defeat Cercopithecus. Buzz. An invisible wave spread out. Within 100 meters, all the plants were under Gray's control. Patter. The forest ape, who had been sent flying, climbed up in a daze. It naturally did not feel pain now. As long as it did not affect its mobility, any injury, no matter how severe, was nothing to it. However, Cercopithecus did not intend to give it a chance to breathe. Just as it got up, Cercopithecus had already approached it. Its huge tail suddenly attacked Cercopithecus. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. At this moment, the surrounding plants suddenly came to life. They stretched out their tentacles and entangled the huge tail of Cercopithecus. The terrifyingly huge tail smashed hundreds of tentacles and finally fell down powerlessly. At this moment, new tentacles appeared and quickly entangled the huge tail of Cercopithecus. Sharp thorns even pierced the huge tail. However, as a barbarian-level blood fiend, its defense was too strong. The sharp thorns only left shallow wounds on the huge tail. It was difficult for them to pierce any further. Crack, crack! Suddenly bound by the vines, the three-headed snake began to struggle. Its enormous strength caused the vines that bound it to quickly break apart. Although the vines were still growing rapidly, it was obvious that the speed at which they broke apart was faster. Not only that, Cercopithecus bent its heads and prepared to bite the vines. At this moment, boom! Cercopithecus, which was under Gray's control, was ready to attack. Suddenly, it leaped up and jumped to the side of the bound Cercopithecus. Cercopithecus's huge fists smashed down 3 times in a row, attacking each of the 3 snake heads. Boom, boom, boom. As a barbarian-level blood fiend, Cercopithecus was known for its strength. Naturally, it was extremely powerful. The 3 snake heads that were hit by Cercopithecus's fists were cracked and badly mutilated. Dark red blood flowed out from the wounds. Cercopithecus was even sent flying by the last punch. It flew for dozens of meters and broke many trees. Hiss, hiss! Cercopithecus was extremely angry at the sudden loss. It coiled its body, and its 3 heads simultaneously faced Cercopithecus. With its low intelligence, Cercopithecus naturally did not realize that the vines that were binding it did not come from Cercopithecus, but from someone else. After a moment of confrontation, Cercopithecus launched an attack. A huge green wind blade, like a huge sharp blade, quickly slashed towards Cercopithecus. Swish, swish, swish! A large number of vines grew out in front of Cercopithecus and intercepted the wind blade. Puff, puff, puff! Although the vines were as hard as steel, the wind blade could cut through iron like it was mud. A large number of vines were cut apart. In the end, the wind blade broke through the blockade and slashed Cercopithecus's body. However, after layers of weakening, the wind blade's power was reduced to the minimum. When it slashed Cercopithecus's body, it only forced Cercopithecus to retreat more than 10 meters. Gray's planned ability was, after all, obtained from a special blood fiend like the Jade Lizard. It was stronger than ordinary berserk blood fiends, and its power was even close to that of a barbaric-level blood fiend. If he did not care about the blood force and used all his strength, he could even be comparable to a barbaric-level blood fiend for a short period of time. It was natural for him to have such an effect. Bang! After resisting the wind blade's aftermath, Cercopithecus took a step forward and suddenly jumped up. Using the vines as leverage, it leaped high into the air and punched the three-headed snake that had just used its wind blade ability. Boom! After a dull sound, Cercopithecus was sent flying backward, and a large number of trees were knocked down. Another part of the green snake's head was badly mutilated, and blood splattered everywhere. Thump, thump, thump. Cercopithecus quickly chased after Cercopithecus, which was sent flying backward. Cercopithecus coiled angrily. Its red head was held high, and a huge burning fireball appeared. As it rolled, it attacked Cercopithecus. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Gray hurriedly controlled the plants to grow quickly and intercept the fireball. A large number of plants acted like a wooden fence, protecting Cercopithecus behind it. Chi, chi, chi. However, Cercopithecus's flame ability was obviously very effective against Gray's plant ability. The plants that tried to intercept the fireball were all charred and destroyed. In the end, the huge fireball broke through the restraints of the plants and crashed into Cercopithecus. Boom! The violent explosion created an open space. The surrounding plants were all burned to ashes, and a terrifying heat wave swept across the area. Fortunately, Cercopithecus had already dodged to the side while the plants were obstructing the fireball. However, although Cercopithecus had dodged, it was still unavoidable that it would be affected. Once again, many burns appeared on its body. I have to destroy the snake's head that can use the flame ability first. Seeing this scene, Gray's good mood from cooperating with Cercopithecus and causing the three-headed snake to suffer a small loss disappeared. Although he knew that Cercopithecus's flame ability was very effective against his plant ability, he did not expect it to be so effective. Under the high temperature of the fireball, the plants were easily pierced like bubbles. After making up his mind, Gray pushed his plant ability to the limit. He did not care about the large consumption of his blood energy and used his plant ability to the maximum. Even though he had reached the level of a berserker, he could only use this method about 3 times a day. It consumed too much of his blood energy. However, the effect was significant. In the blink of an eye, the plant vines that were originally as hard as steel were once again raised in hardness, surpassing that of ordinary steel and becoming even harder than steel. Cercopithecus's plant ability was temporarily comparable to that of a barbarian-level blood fiend. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A large number of vines appeared near the three-headed snake. They swarmed out and wrapped around the three-headed snake's body. His goal was very clear, which was to restrain the three-headed snake and buy time for Cercopithecus. He had tried using his plant ability to attack the three-headed snake before. Against a barbarian-level blood fiend, the damage was not very high. At most, it could cause superficial wounds, and it was difficult to pierce through. Although it was much more powerful now, it was not enough to cause serious injuries to the three-headed snake. It was better to focus on restraining the three-headed snake and leave the attack to the powerful Cercopithecus. Crack! After being restrained by the vines, whose hardness and tenacity had increased by another level, the three-headed snake's struggle became extremely difficult. All 3 of its heads bent down and bit at the vines. The vines, which were tougher than steel, were quickly breaking under the bites of the 3 snake heads. At this moment, boom, 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 Cercopithecus quickly approached the three-headed snake's body. Ignoring the other 2 snake heads, it continuously punched the red snake head. Crack! After a few punches, the red snake head was badly mutilated. Even one of its huge poisonous fangs had been broken. It looked extremely miserable. Just as he was about to punch the red snake head again, crack, with a snapping sound and the other 2 snake heads tearing at it. The three-headed snake's huge tail finally broke free from its restraints and whistled as it quickly attacked the forest ape. Cercopithecus had no time to dodge. It was ruthlessly whipped by the huge tail and suddenly flew backward,